Hello guys. Tonight, we begin a quiet journey into the amber-lit past, into the ash-streaked alleyways and soot-covered memories of a city once brought to its knees by flame. Our story tonight is one of fire and rebuilding, of myths and resilience. It's a slow walk through the long shadows of 19th century Chicago, and how the Great Fire of 1871 would quietly, profoundly, and permanently change America. Before we begin, I'd love for you to comment where in the world you're listening from and what time it is for you, whether it's early morning or deep in the night. I'm always curious, because history in a way connects us all through time. Now, get cozy, pull the blankets up, rest your head against the pillow and let your muscles slowly settle. Let your breath deepen. There's no rush here. You're safe. You're drifting back now, gently, through time. It is the early autumn of 1871. You're in Chicago, a city that smells of pine and sawdust, horses and lake breeze. It's only 34 years old, this city, but already it hums with ambition. The clatter of wheels against plank roads, the faint ringing of bells, the hollow wooden footsteps of someone walking just ahead of you. Chicago is growing faster than almost any place on Earth. Between 1850 and 1870, the population has exploded from 30,000 to nearly 300,000 souls. They come by rail and boat from the Midwest farms and eastern cities, from Ireland and Germany and Scandinavia. They come with calloused hands, folded newspapers, baby shoes tucked in bags. They come to build a future. The streets are lined with wooden buildings, over 17,000 of them, hastily raised, cheap and dry. Even the sidewalks and roads are built of timber. You can hear it as you walk. The wood creaks faintly beneath your feet. There is no pavement here yet. Not really. Just pressed dirt and wooden planks. The city is alive but vulnerable, and the summer that just passed was long and hot and cruelly dry. Rain has not visited Chicago properly in months. The riverbanks are cracked. The air tastes faintly of smoke already, as though the city somehow senses what is coming. You walk past modest homes and barns behind them. A cat sleeps curled on a porch rail. Chickens rustle in a narrow alley. The fire wagons pulled by horses clatter by now and then, but they're few and far between. The city has 185 firefighters, not nearly enough for a place this size. Still, there's an energy to it. This is America's city of promise. Chicago is the beating heart of the grain trade, the meatpacking capital, the new frontier of industry and rail. It connects the prairies to the world. You can feel it standing here, amid the bustle and wooden awnings, that you're inside something new, something that matters. But there is something brittle about it too, a fragility beneath the noise. And as you pass a row of shops, milliners, butchers, a grocer, you feel a dry wind curl down the street and rattle a loose board on the roof above you. No one expects what is coming. You pause at a corner where the O'Leary home sits, a modest structure. The barn out back holds cows and hay. Catherine O'Leary is a quiet woman of Irish descent. Her name will soon be legend, though unjustly so. Her cow will be blamed for the Great Fire, and though it will later be disproved, the myth will linger, like smoke in an old coat. Right now, she's asleep. It's Sunday night, October 8th, 1871. You look up, the sky is clear, the city is peaceful in its exhaustion, and yet, as you walk back toward the river, toward the stables and workshops and tiny wooden homes, there's a subtle shift in the air, like something waiting to happen. And so, you keep walking, gently, slowly, as though your footsteps themselves might hold back what history has already decided. The fire has not started yet, but it will, and when it does, it will spread not only through streets and buildings, but through myths and memory, through laws and skylines, through America itself. Tonight, you are part of the world just before everything changes. The barn is quiet. Inside, a soft rustling of hay, the creak of old beams settling in the cool night air. Catherine O'Leary's cows shift in their stalls, the lantern extinguished hours ago. A few chickens huddle in the corner, still and drowsy. Outside, the wind drifts lazily through the alleyways of DeKoven Street, stirring dust, lifting dry leaves along the wooden walkways. Somewhere, a single lamp flickers in a window. A man reads by candlelight. Children sleep upstairs, their faces soft in the hush of early night. It is Sunday, a day of rest, and most are in bed early. The air smells faintly of ashes from dinner fires. It is dry, dangerously so, but no one thinks of danger. Not here, not in a city that has grown so quickly, so confidently, and yet, just before 9 or 8 p.m, somewhere within or near the O'Leary barn, a small flame appears. No one sees exactly how it begins. Later, newspapers will blame a cow kicking over a lantern, but that story is built from fear, not fact. There are other theories. A careless smoker, boys sneaking into the barn to drink, spontaneous combustion of damp hay. It hardly matters. The result is the same. The flame finds fuel instantly. Dry hay, brittle wood, loose straw littering the barn floor. A few seconds pass. The fire grows. Heat blooms outward. In minutes, the barn is ablaze, and flames claw upward, leaping to the roof, spitting embers into the air. A neighbour sees the glow and runs to alert the authorities, but already the fire has jumped, first to a nearby shed, then a row of wooden fences, and then a home, catching the eaves like kindling. Within 15 minutes, the entire block is on fire. You walk slowly down the street as if through a fever dream, shouting now, a dog barking, a horse whinnies in panic. Buckets are being passed, water splashed in vain against walls that seem to ignite at the mere touch of heat. You see a man at the roof of his home, trying to tear off shingles, hoping to halt the fire's advance. Others run to rescue what they can. Small trunks, a Bible, children in nightshirts carried barefoot into the street. The fire is not like anything they've seen before. It moves too quickly, devouring blocks in minutes. The wind changes and fans the flames eastward toward the city's core. Sparks fall like red snow on rooftops ahead of the fire line, igniting them before anyone can respond. The wooden sidewalks become highways for flame. Trees beside buildings turn to torches. The night becomes red, orange, alive with terrible light. The fire department arrives, steam engines pulled by exhausted horses, but the hydrants are dry or misaligned, the water pressure weak, the city unprepared. Hose lines unravel in the dirt, shouts echo in the confusion, and still the fire spreads. By midnight, the business district is in danger. The winds, cruel and steady, drive the inferno northeast. As you make your way through the chaos, past crying children and staggering men, past falling walls and skies turned molten, you can see the outlines of churches and warehouses silhouetted against a curtain of flame. The river itself, a natural barrier, fails to stop it. Sparks leap across the water, igniting lumberyards and oil-soaked docks on the opposite shore. There is no strategy now, just flight. People run with what they can carry. Some carry their sick, others drag sacks of flour or crates of books. The roads are jammed with carts and carriages and panicked horses. The night becomes long and bright, the fire turning the sky a furious gold. You continue on, not running, just walking, as though you've always been there. Among them, unnoticed, present in the blur of movement and heat. Buildings collapse in the distance with dull, thunderous groans. Smoke hangs low to the ground. It stings the eyes, burns the lungs, and above it all, a wind that seems not natural but summoned. Like the fire has drawn the breath of the earth into itself, and it is still only the beginning. By dawn, the fire has already consumed entire neighbourhoods, and the city that had stood so proudly only hours before is now cloaked in smoke, its outline deformed and shrinking. You move through the wreckage in the half-light, through streets now choked with debris, along the banks of the river where warehouse walls sag like wet paper. The air is filled with the bitter smell of burning tar, scorched brick, horsehair and cloth. Overhead, the sky is still dark despite the hour, thick with ash and embers swirling like snow caught in a storm. The fire had begun in the West Division, but as the night passed it crossed the river and entered the heart of the city, the South Division, home to churches, hotels, and Chicago's proud commercial district. It moved quickly through wooden shacks and flammable storefronts, leaping from roof to roof, floor to floor, as if with intention. Even the grander structures built of brick and stone were no match once their interiors ignited. Paint boiled off doors, iron fixtures warped and twisted, granite cracked. The courthouse, considered one of the safest buildings in the city, burned with a roar, its tower collapsing as the fire licked at the bell like it were paper. You pass it now. What remains is only rubble, hot and steaming, its stone blackened and brittle. A group of people stands around it in silence. Some weep, others stare blankly, clutching bundles, faces streaked with soot and sweat. No one speaks. Words would mean little here. Further along you see the old Palmer House Hotel, once the pride of the city's hospitality, now a gutted husk. Its drapes had caught first, then the ornate staircases and tapestries, until only the stone walls remained, cracked open and crumbling. A piano, half melted, sits in the open like a relic of a lost civilization. You hear no music now, only the distant crash of collapsing timber, the low murmur of fleeing crowds, and the occasional sharp crack of something heavy giving way. There are strange scenes all around you. A man dragging a mirror behind him, the glass somehow still intact. A woman holding a bundle of framed photographs, her shoes missing, her hair wild with ash. Children sleeping in stairwells, curled together, unaware of the ruin unfolding just beyond. At the lakefront, thousands gather, desperate for open air and safety. They have brought what little they could carry. Pots, pets, mattresses, ledgers, jewellery, chairs. They sit or stand in clusters, watching as the city's skyline disappears behind flame. In the chaos there is little order. The police are overwhelmed. Soldiers from the nearby forts are called in, not to fight the fire but to keep looters at bay. There are rumours of people shot for stealing, of price gouging at wells, of fights over buckets of water. But amid the fear, there are acts of quiet grace. You see a woman sharing bread with strangers, a man helping an elderly couple carry their belongings, a child leading a blind neighbour away from the smoke. Small human moments persist even here, but the fire has not yet stopped. The North Division, largely residential, is now in its path. Wooden tenements, churches and schools, places of family and memory, are swallowed by the advancing wall of flame. The residents had hoped the river would protect them, but the fire is no longer a natural thing. It jumps where it shouldn't. It burns faster than reason. Wind pushes it into new places with renewed energy. Even the firemen, exhausted and overwhelmed, can only try to steer the flames away from what's left of the city's infrastructure. But there are few tools, little water, and too much fire. You pass a fire engine, still attached to its horse, both turned to blackened statues by heat. The crew had fled too late. Nearby, a church steeple burns from the inside out, its stained glass windows shattering as the wooden ribs beneath collapse inward. Sparks dance across the rooftops like fireflies, lighting new blazes as they fall, and still the wind blows. Through it all you walk, your steps slow and steady. The sounds fade to a distant hum. You feel the heat less now, as if something in you has adjusted to the landscape of ruin. You're no longer startled by collapse or flame. You're a witness, gliding through a city in the midst of transformation, not just in its buildings, but in its future, in the shape of what it will become. Somewhere ahead, the sun rises unseen behind smoke. A dim light filters through the haze, colouring the city in sepia and grey. For a moment, there is a kind of stillness, and you understand that the fire, for all its fury, is not just a destroyer. It is a turning point, marking the end of something, and the uncertain beginning of what comes next. You're standing now in what had been Lincoln Park, just north of the downtown. It was once a peaceful place, filled with trees and stone benches, children's laughter, and the scent of lake wind weaving through the grass. Now it's a field of smoke and wandering families, a temporary refuge as the fire rips its way toward the edge of the city. Behind you, columns of blackness rise into the sky, darkening the morning. Before you, the lake glistens in strange, silent contrast. Cool and calm, a mirror to the chaos behind. All night the fire has moved like a living thing, its rhythm changing but never ceasing. The flames no longer rage with the same height as before, but the embers stretch farther. In every direction you see buildings collapsed into themselves, brick shells lined with soot, scorched wooden beams pointing skyward like broken fingers. The ground is a layer of ash several inches deep, grey and soft beneath your feet. The sidewalks have burned, leaving open trenches. Horses lie still in the roads, their outlines barely visible beneath dust. The city is unrecognisable. You move through streets that have no names anymore, Signposts have burned, landmarks are gone. What had been an orderly grid is now an indistinct pattern of ruin. The stench is stronger now, damp wood, charred flesh, chemicals released from destroyed factories and tanneries. The fire didn't only destroy, it transformed. It turned familiar spaces into something dreamlike and eerie, as if the laws of shape and purpose have been suspended. You pass the remnants of a schoolhouse, its bell silent, its desks and books reduced to blackened rubble. A globe lies cracked open like a broken egg. No children remain. At one corner you see where entire blocks were consumed so quickly that metal signs still hang, bent and blackened but legible. Shoe repair, feed store, cigars. Inside the ruins you can just make out outlines where walls once stood. The city burned from the inside out, the fire feeding first on its poorest structures, the shanties and tenements, before turning on its finer districts with equal fury. It made no distinction. Now and then you see people digging, quiet, methodical, searching for what remains. A woman pulls a kettle from a mound of ash. A boy pokes at the ground with a stick, uncovering something metal and warped. A man lifts a burnt picture frame, peers at what had been inside, then lets it fall. No one cries here. Not yet. There is only fatigue, and the distant sound of voices calling for loved ones, for water, for God. The churches did not survive. Holy Name Cathedral, just weeks from completion, was reduced to ash in under an hour. St. James, Trinity, St. Paul's, all gone. Their towers collapsed inward, their stained glass shattered, their bells melted into strange, unrecognisable shapes. The fire made even the sacred ordinary in its destruction. The newspaper offices are gone too. The Chicago Tribune, its presses melted, its stories cut short mid-sentence. The libraries, public and private, burned to the ground, taking with them over 2 million books, records and rare collections. You think of how much was lost in silence. Maps, manuscripts, letters, names, things not measured in dollars but in memory. But the most haunting place, as you find your way to the lakeshore once again, is the refugee camp forming at the edge of the city. Tens of thousands now gather in the open air, homeless and silent. They sit among piles of rescued belongings, iron bed frames, broken clocks, trunks filled with damp, scorched linens. Mothers cradle children who do not speak. The elderly sit wrapped in blankets staring into the middle distance. Some pray aloud, some sing old songs in their native languages, faint trembling voices carried on the breeze like threads of a frayed tapestry. You see Catherine O'Leary there too, standing far from her ruined barn, surrounded by strangers who do not speak to her. Her face is unreadable. She has already begun to understand that the city will blame her, that her name will become a curse on people's lips, a cow and a lantern, a single moment. Soon the entire country will know this version of the story, and few will question it. The truth won't matter. The fire begins to slow not because of anything the people have done, but because the wind, at last, begins to die. A rain falls thin and hesitant just before dawn on Tuesday. The ground hisses where the drops meet embers. The fire will continue to smoulder in pockets, but the worst is done. 3 square miles of the city lie in ruins. 17,000 buildings are gone. Over 100,000 people are without homes. The monetary damage is impossible to count with precision. Some will estimate $200 million in 1871 dollars, but money will never truly explain what was lost. The fire is over, but the story of Chicago has only just begun to change. In the days immediately following the fire, Chicago becomes something it has never been before. Not a city of industry or ambition or grain or rail, but a city of survivors. You walk through the skeletal remains of what had once been one of the proudest urban experiments in the country, and it is quiet, eerily quiet, except for the wind stirring ash and the murmur of thousands of displaced voices drifting up from the lakefront, the parks, the hills beyond the river. The north side is almost entirely gone. What had been rows of homes, brick townhouses, wooden cottages shaded by trees, are now flat stretches of grey, interrupted only by scorched chimneys jutting upward like tombstones. The streets are almost unnavigable. Where once there were signs and corners and streetcar lines, now there is only soot and the distant glint of metal beneath rubble. In places the ground is still warm to the touch. Cellars smoulder. Stone walls, left freestanding, lean slightly in the breeze and collapse with no warning. At Lincoln Park, tens of thousands have taken shelter beneath open skies. Tents are rare. Blankets strung across broken tree limbs, scraps of fabric tied into lean-tos, the shells of wagons turned into makeshift beds. These are the homes now. People line up for bread, their faces sunken with exhaustion. Soldiers from nearby forts stand watch, not with hostility, but with a firm, silent presence. Order must be kept, even here. Children sleep on coats. Women boil water in soot-covered kettles. Men wander, searching for neighbours, for wives, for sons who disappeared in the confusion of smoke and stampede. You move through them slowly, not intruding, just present. A quiet shape passing between clusters of families. Someone offers you a cup of water. Someone else, a small package of preserved meat wrapped in newspaper. There is a quiet dignity in this place. Grief has not yet turned to anger, and survival has taken precedence over mourning. The people are dazed, but not broken. Already, there is talk of what can be done next. Rebuilding, clearing the ruins, finding work. The words are soft, hesitant, but they rise like smoke toward a future that hasn't yet arrived. In the distance, from the still-standing edges of the city, wagons roll in from the west. Aid is arriving. News of the fire spread quickly, carried by telegraph and word of mouth. Donations begin to pour in from St. Louis, Milwaukee, Cincinnati, even New York and Boston. Food, blankets, money. Chicago, so recently envied for its sudden success, is now pitied and embraced. The entire country watches. Some see it as punishment, a judgment against hubris. Others see an opportunity to help shape the rebirth of a place that had seemed, until now, untouchable. You follow a group of volunteers to one of the makeshift depots in a half-destroyed church on the west side. The roof is gone, but the stone walls stand, and inside there are tables of bread, barrels of apples, canvas bags of flour stacked neatly in rows. People work in silence. A man in a priest collar hands out paper slips for meals. A girl sharpens pencils for a school that no longer exists. On a shattered altar, a ledger is being compiled. Names of the missing, the injured, the lost. A few pages blow in the wind and settle near your feet. Outside, a line of men wait for jobs promised by city officials. Clearing rubble, repairing sewers, hauling bricks. No work is turned down. Men with soft hands stand beside those with calloused ones, all of them suddenly equal under soot. Those who were wealthy days ago now wear borrowed coats, sleep beside stable hands and bakers, speak in the same low tones about what to do next. The fire has erased distinctions that seemed permanent. It has flattened the map of status, if only for a while. And yet, not everyone has suffered equally. You notice that the refugee camps are composed largely of working-class families, German immigrants, Irish labourers, black freedmen who came north after the war. The wealthiest residents, those who lived in the Far West Division, or along the less affected outskirts, have moved into boarding houses, hotels, or the homes of relatives. Private homes outside the fire's reach swell with uninvited guests. Some offer shelter freely, others do so with reluctance. Rumours begin to spread of price gouging, of theft, of landlords tripling rent. The city's unity, so touching in the first hours of disaster, begins to strain, and there is still the question of blame. Already whispers point fingers, first at Catherine O'Leary, her cow, her ethnicity, her religion. The story spreads not because it is true, but because it is easy, a single moment, a careless act, a convenient foreign scapegoat. The newspapers latch on, crafting a myth the city can live with. You see her name written in chalk on a ruined wall, accompanied by a crude drawing of a cow and the word murderer. You wonder if she knows yet how large her role in this tale will become, how little her protest will matter. Facts are small things next to stories that comfort people in their confusion. And so, the city waits. The smoke begins to lift. The fires have cooled. The counting begins. Of bodies, of bricks, of dollars lost. The city stands on the edge of something uncertain, exhausted and stripped bare. But underneath the ash, something stirs. Not defiance, not yet. Just the smallest outline of resolve. The heart of the city's economic machine once beat strongest just south of the river, along the streets lined with warehouses, grain elevators, packing plants, foundries, and banks. You walk through it now, your steps quiet against a ground that used to thunder beneath the hooves of dray horses and the rolling wheels of heavily laden carts. Here, on what was once LaSalle Street and Market, wealth changed hands at astonishing speed. Contracts were signed in walnut-panelled offices, grain futures were speculated upon. Men carried pocket watches and silk hats, their eyes scanning ledgers with confidence drawn from a city that never seemed to stop growing. All of it gone now. The fire left no room for hierarchy here. The institutions of capital, insurance offices, trading firms, brokers and bond houses, burned just as quickly as the lumberyards and saloons. Iron safes sit exposed in the skeletons of office buildings, their contents cooked beyond recognition. Vault doors hang open like the mouths of dead animals. The columns of once grand bank buildings stand blackened, supporting nothing but air. Charred ledgers crumble in your fingers if touched. Bronze plaques have melted into slag. The names on the windows are gone, replaced by smoke stains and silence. In some places the damage is so uniform that one ruin blends seamlessly into the next, a whole district made of shadow and ruin. You step over bricks, the ground uneven and still hot beneath the surface. This is not the destruction of a single fire block, it is the erasure of an entire economy's infrastructure. The grain elevators at the river's edge, massive wooden towers filled with last season's harvest, had exploded into flame within minutes. The warehouses filled with wool, meat, candles, oils, all gone. Even the bridges crossing the river melted under the heat, or collapsed as the foundations beneath them burned away. And yet, amid the blackened bones of enterprise, people have already begun to return. You pass two men examining the frame of a half-destroyed building with quiet intensity. One gestures to the remaining support beams, the other to the footprint of the structure, scribbling measurements in a soot-smudged notebook. A third man emerges from a wagon nearby, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and begins laying out survey stakes. There is no ceremony here, no grand announcements, only the quiet murmur of decisions being made in the wake of devastation. Further on, you see where the telegraph office once stood. The poles had burned, but new ones are already being erected. Telegraph wires droop between them like damp ribbons, reconnecting the broken city to the outside world. Communication must be restored before anything else can move. Rail lines must be cleared, banks reopened, shipments rerouted. The survival of Chicago depends not just on shelter or food, but on trade, on transactions, on the swift return of capital to a city brought to the edge. And this urgency is not only local. From New York to London, the fire sends shudders through the financial world. Chicago is a vital artery in the movement of goods across the American interior. Its destruction threatens the flow of grain, meat, lumber, and iron. Insurance companies panic. Underwriters scramble to calculate losses. Newspapers in other cities run extra editions not just to report the devastation, but to reassure readers and investors that Chicago will somehow return. There is disbelief at the scale of the fire, but also a strange, almost greedy fascination with what the city might become in its aftermath. Because even as smoke still curls from the ruins, a vision begins to form, not one of despair, but of opportunity. You overhear conversations between merchants and architects, city officials and industrialists. Not just about rebuilding, but about building differently, better, larger. The old Chicago, with its haphazard zoning, its flammable construction, its narrow alleys and tangled roads, is already being spoken of in the past tense. A new city could rise in its place, a city of stone and steel, with fireproof buildings and wide boulevards, a city that learns from its suffering, a city not just restored, but reborn. That vision is not yet concrete, but the outlines are there, in the measured glances, the quiet notes in sketchbooks, the way fingers trace blueprints onto boards still warm from the fire. In the debris of lost fortunes there is already movement, already hope shaped into intention, and not everyone is waiting. On the outskirts, in neighbourhoods that escaped the worst of the fire, shops are reopening. Sawmills run late into the night. Print presses that survived are issuing broadsheets filled with updates, notices and calls to action. Relief committees organise lists of the missing, instructions for food rations and appeals for supplies. Civic leaders meet in borrowed offices, drafting emergency ordinances by candlelight. The city, even wounded and gasping, is not still. As you leave the business district behind, you pass a boy selling scorched apples from a cart. His face is smudged, his voice thin, but he calls out prices with practiced calm. A man stops, pays with a blackened coin, and bites into the fruit as if it were the most ordinary moment in the world. Nearby, two former rivals in shipping logistics share a bench and a quiet conversation, not in competition now, but in something like kinship. The city has been hollowed out, but in that hollow something steady remains, something that does not fall with walls or burn with papers. You begin to understand it, not as defiance, but as a kind of inevitability. Chicago will return because Chicago has to. The fire is out, the wind has died, the smoke has thinned, and yet a new current begins to move through the city. Not flame, not panic, but story. Where buildings once stood, where timbers lay twisted and black, words now take root. You move among them as they rise, not shouted, not announced, but passed from person to person, carried softly in the way that grief often is. You hear them in soup lines at firesites, whispered beside wagon wheels, muttered as ashes swept from doorsteps. In a void, people create shape. In ruin, they build meaning, and in tragedy, they find someone to blame. The O'Leary story spreads faster than any ember ever had. You hear it again and again, reshaped each time but always the same at its core. A cow, a lantern, a clumsy woman. She had been milking late at night, they say. The cow kicked over the lamp, the hay caught. The barn flared up like dry parchment, and the fire was born. Some add colour, say she had been drinking, or that it wasn't her first accident, or that she laughed as the fire took the house next door. Others place a boy in the barn with a match. Others say the whole block was cursed. No one agrees on the details, but none of that seems to matter. A name is enough. Catherine O'Leary becomes the face of the disaster, not because it is true, but because the city needs a shape for its grief. The newspapers embrace it immediately. By the end of the week, the Chicago Tribune prints her name beneath headlines thick with accusation. Illustrations follow, crude but vivid depictions of a cow, wild-eyed and mid-kick, the lantern tumbling through the air. The drawings become almost iconic, as though they had been captured in fact rather than imagination. Her Irishness, her Catholicism, her working-class home, all are drawn into the myth. The fire becomes not a natural disaster, not an urban failure, but an act born of carelessness and foreign blood. You pass her house again. It still stands, barely, damaged but not fully consumed. A strange irony. The barn behind it is gone, of course, now just a rectangle of char and earth, but the house remains, like a placeholder for the weight of the city's accusation. It is quiet here. She and her family have withdrawn, wrapped in shame that isn't theirs. No formal charges will ever be brought, no evidence produced, but the verdict has already been written in headlines and repeated in drawing rooms and saloons, and that myth, you realise, serves more than one purpose. It distracts from the harder truths about how the city was built. That it was made of pine and tar paper, that its streets and sidewalks were wooden, its buildings stacked tightly, its water system inefficient, its fire protection outdated. That greed had shaped its growth faster than reason. But when the summer left the city bone dry, few paid attention. That the first fire crews were sent to the wrong address. That the fire watcher had hesitated. That the equipment was failing. That too many warnings were ignored, but a cow is simpler. As you walk through the surviving neighbourhoods, those that escaped the flames, you find conversations turning to judgment. Not about city infrastructure, but about behaviour. People talk of God's wrath, of sin, of punishment. Some point to Sunday labour as the offence, others to the city's growing decadence, its theatres and pleasure halls. A few see it in political terms as the price for corruption or neglect. The fire becomes a canvas onto which people project their fear and resentment, their theology and politics, their prejudices and longings, and stories grow fast in ruins. You hear of men who looted burning buildings and returned the goods days later out of guilt, of dogs that led families to safety, of a man who watched his entire library burn and then sat calmly, writing a new poem in the ashes. of a woman who gave birth beside the lake as the fire passed, the baby named Phoenix. Some of these stories are true, others only feel like they could be, but no one questions them too closely. In the absence of shape, stories offer structure. You pass by a crowd gathered around a man reciting details in dramatic tones, how he saw the first spark, how he tried to fight the flames, how he was the one who warned the firemen. You notice others watching him with narrowed eyes, not quite believing, but letting him speak. Everyone needs a part in the story, even if it must be borrowed. In a disaster this vast, each person seeks a thread to hold. But not all myths comfort. You hear other names whispered in anger now, not just O'Leary, but whole neighbourhoods blamed, whole groups, immigrants, especially the Irish, find themselves treated with new suspicion. German families are accused of hoarding water. Black residents are driven from relief lines by angry voices. The fire did not burn evenly, and the survival of certain homes and communities sparks rumours of conspiracy, of betrayal. The city begins to fracture again, not from fire, but from fear, and yet, beneath the noise, quieter truths survive. You sit beside an older man near what had been his bakery. He speaks with calm resignation, not about who caused the fire, but about the city before it, about how it was bound to happen someday. He tells you of inspectors who were ignored, of neighbourhoods where the wood was stacked too high and the water too far away. He doesn't need a myth. He remembers the real city too well. Behind him, the sun sets over the lake, pale through the lingering haze. The ruins glow faintly in the dimming light, the last heat of the fire still radiating from the earth, and as you look out across the broken skyline, you can already sense that this myth, the one of the cow, the one of sin and punishment, of deserving and undeserving, will survive longer than any building ever did. It will shape how the city sees itself for generations, and yet, it will not define what comes next. The city moves now with a strange rhythm, part exhaustion, part urgency. The fire is over, but the work has only begun. You walk through a haze of motion as men and carts flow through the streets with an almost mechanical focus, clearing what remains, tearing down what still stands. A sound has returned to Chicago, not the sound of flame or fleeing, but the steady, grounded thud of hammers, the scrape of shovels, the creak of wheels heavy with brick and rubble. The city has become a great field of excavation, and you are there among it, moving quietly through the skeletal remains. Much of what stands must still be removed. You pass walls cracked down the middle, held upright by habit rather than structure, beams blackened and bowed with heat, staircases that climb into the open air. The fire destroyed the interiors, but left the outlines, a fragile illusion of buildings that no longer exist. Those outlines are now being picked apart by teams of men, some hired by the city, others simply doing what they can to reclaim their lots, their basements, their place on the map. It is slow work. There is no machinery for this, not really. It is labour with hands and horses and rudimentary tools. Men use crowbars to pry up stones, hoist scorched timber onto wagons, sweep endless clouds of ash from foundations where houses once stood. The air is thick with dust, a fine grey film that settles into your clothes, your skin, your lungs. At times it feels as though you're walking through fog, the outlines of buildings and people only half visible. But there is a rhythm to it, a strange persistent pulse that carries forward despite the weight of the task. You pass the remnants of the courthouse again. The bell tower had collapsed during the second night of the fire, burying cells and corridors beneath tons of stone. A group of convicts released when the fire reached the walls never returned. Some have likely died, others vanished into the countryside. The sheriff's records were burned. Their names may be lost forever. In the ruins, workers dig slowly, carefully, not for gold or treasure, but for bodies. Not many are found, most were consumed, but here and there remains are uncovered. Rings, a belt buckle, a scorched set of spectacles, a child's shoes. They are collected in silence, wrapped in canvas, taken away without ceremony. The city has declared martial law in places. Armed patrols walk the perimeter of the destroyed zones. Looting was never as widespread as feared, but the presence of soldiers brings a kind of order that the police cannot enforce alone. They direct traffic, protect supply wagons, keep the labourers from turning on one another when tempers flare. You see them everywhere. Faces dusted with ash, rifles slung over shoulders, eyes scanning the ruins not with fear but with weary discipline. And there are flags now. You notice them more and more, small cloth markers driven into the ground where plots once stood. Some bear names, others numbers. A few are coloured, signalling ownership, status or fate. The city has begun to redraw itself already. Surveyors walk the ruins with instruments, aligning what was with what will be. Foundations are measured. Claims are filed. Disputes arise, of course. Two men shouting over the same lot. A woman insisting that her family lived there before the one next door. With no surviving deeds, memories must serve as documents. Bureaucracy returns slowly. The mayor's office, temporarily relocated, issues new guidelines. No more wooden construction in the city centre. New permits required. Fireproof materials mandated for commercial buildings. The newspapers begin printing again. Thin, imperfect editions, but enough to keep the city informed. You read headlines calling for unity, for strength, for investment. Editorials speak of opportunity. Rebirth. The word phoenix begins to appear with almost religious frequency, a symbol of myth, now drawn into civic identity. Chicago, the Phoenix City, rising from the ashes. But for most, it doesn't feel like rebirth yet. It feels like weight, like loss, like dirt under the nails and another week of sleeping under tarps or in borrowed rooms. You pass a line of people at the relief depot. Some have been there every morning since the fire, waiting for food, for clothing, for word of relatives. A woman holds a small boy whose skin is mottled with smoke burns. An old man clutches a sack filled with bent spoons and cracked dishes. The only thing saved from his home. They don't look angry. They look tired. And yet there is motion. A merchant you recognise from days before the fire is setting up a new stand. This one made from salvaged shutters and a plank balanced on barrels. He is selling nails, buttons, matches, whatever he could find. Across the street, two carpenters unload fresh timber, not city issue, but brought in from outside. The railroads are open again, and material flows in with astonishing speed. Wisconsin lumber, Indiana brick. Ohio stone. All drawn to this broken city by one thing, the certainty that it will rebuild. Because Chicago is too valuable not to return. Its position on the lake, its railroad connections, its role as a funnel for grain, livestock and industry, these are not things that burn. The fire consumed the body, but the skeleton remains. The investors know it. The politicians know it. Even the labourers know it, deep beneath their weariness, and so they keep digging, sweeping, lifting, clearing, not for today, not even for this year, but for what comes next. You walk back toward the lake as the sun sinks low, the light painting the ash in soft orange hues. There is almost beauty in it. The colour on the stone, the dust rising in slow spirals, the distant shapes of wagons pulling away into the haze. And you realise that the fire, though over, is still present in everything. In the stories, in the silence, in the motion of hands rebuilding something they cannot yet see. The city is a wound, but it is also a plan. The city has cleared just enough space to see possibility again. The smoke has thinned into memory, the heat faded from the stones. What remains is raw earth, scorched and uneven, still littered with debris but open now. Open in a way that cities rarely are. Chicago, flattened and stripped to its framework, is exposed like a blueprint. And so, naturally, the builders begin to arrive. You see them early in the day, gathered on a corner near what had been the heart of the commercial district. Their clothes are finer than most here. Their hands are cleaner. Some carry large rolled papers tucked under arms or strapped to cases. They speak in low, fast voices, half audible over the hammering and shouting farther down the block. These are not labourers. They are surveyors, engineers, architects, men who had designed the first version of this city and now stand before its remains, seeing not ruin, but potential. You follow them for a while. They pass from street to street, pausing to study the terrain. One stops to examine the foundation of a collapsed hotel. Another marks the remains of a column with chalk. They argue about load-bearing walls, about stone versus iron, about the need for wider streets and open spaces. The city's density had been part of the problem, they say. Wooden tenements pressed too tightly together, alleys too narrow for fire wagons to pass. The mistakes are obvious now. laid bare by the fire's indiscriminate passage. One man gestures broadly across the ruins and begins describing an avenue lined with arcades and wide sidewalks, gas lamps evenly spaced, iron front buildings with fireproof floors. Another pulls from his coat a folded map, an early version of the city grid, and begins sketching revisions in the margins. You hear him mutter something about symmetry, about flow, about a city designed not just for commerce, but for pride. This is not merely about reconstruction. For them, it is an opportunity, perhaps the only one of its kind, to build an American city deliberately, beautifully, modernly from its own ashes. And not all of them are strangers. Some were already here, local names known for church towers and train stations, civic halls and dry goods warehouses. Others have come from the east, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, drawn by the news, by the scope of destruction, by the idea of a blank canvas. Chicago had always been a place of boldness, of architectural ambition. Now that ambition has been stripped of its restraints, there is no preservation here, no need to accommodate the old. The fire, brutal as it was, has cleared the board. You pass a tent staked to the remains of a stone courthouse, and inside you glimpse drafting tables, stacks of vellum, ink pots and tools arranged with care. Already designs are being drawn, concepts explored. The city council has begun to solicit proposals, not just for individual buildings, but for the entire layout of the reborn city. Street width, sewer access, materials allowed. It is not merely repair, it is reinvention, and the tone is practical, not sentimental. No one speaks of recreating the past exactly as it was. The wooden spires, the narrow storefronts, the cramped rooms above saloons, they are already being spoken of in the past tense. What's coming will be taller, stronger, more efficient. Some push for fireproof materials exclusively: brick, stone, iron. Others warn that the costs will drive out the working class. There are concerns about housing, about how quickly it must be built, but in all the discussion, you hear one thing repeated again and again: permanence. The new city must not burn again, not ever. Of course, not everyone trusts the visionaries. At the edge of a relief depot, you overhear a labourer grumbling about men with pencils who never lifted a beam or filled a bucket. Another complains that the architects talk of boulevards and arches, while he sleeps in a wagon with 6 children. There's tension growing, between those living among ruins and those planning how to replace them. Some feel left out of the future being shaped. Others suspect that progress will mean displacement, new rules, unfamiliar faces. The city may rise, yes, but for whom? Still, you see moments of convergence. In a partially cleared square, a meeting is held beneath a canvas canopy. City officials, builders, church leaders, newspaper editors, business owners, all sit on salvaged chairs and benches, smoke curling in the air as they debate what to do. Someone reads a list of proposed ordinances, fire zones, building codes, restrictions on wooden eaves and shingle roofs. Another proposes a fire district boundary, within which only stone and brick will be allowed. There is shouting, then nods, then a vote. And slowly, a plan emerges. Not a single vision, but a set of possibilities, streets widened by a foot, fire hydrants placed more densely, new iron bridges across the river, a municipal water tower to serve the upper levels of taller buildings, regulations for alley access, roof materials, stairways. The shape of the new city begins to take form, not from any one person, but from the collective heat of ideas pressed into action. You leave the square as the sun dips behind the shattered skyline, light catching on the twisted remains of an iron fence. The city feels strange in this golden hour, still broken, still scarred, but no longer passive. Something has shifted. The city has begun to make decisions, and you walk through it knowing this. The fire erased the old Chicago, but in its place something is being drawn, not only in ink but in stone and steel and hope made practical. Not the same city, never the same, but a city shaped not by survival alone, but by intent. The nights grow colder. It is now late October, and the wind off Lake Michigan arrives with a sharper edge, slipping beneath tents, finding its way through cracks in hastily built walls, stirring the ash that still clings to the city's edges. The fire is no longer fresh. It has settled into memory, recent but already drifting into the first layer of forgetting. But the city is far from healed. For tens of thousands, there is still no home, not a permanent one. Not yet. You walk through one of the largest encampments near Westside Park, where the population has swelled beyond the city's ability to manage it. Rows of makeshift shelters stretch across open land, canvas tents, wooden shanties, crates turned sideways to serve as walls, wagons parked tightly in circles, laundry lines cut across the muddy walkways, sheets stiff with smoke and October air. Smoke from small cook fires drifts low and slow. There is little laughter here, only a murmur of voices and the occasional cough of someone unwell. In the early morning, people line up for supplies. The Relief and Aid Society, hastily formed in the fire's immediate aftermath, has taken on the impossible task of feeding, clothing, and housing nearly a third of the city's population. It is a private organisation, funded by donations from across the country, Philadelphia, New York, even London, and it runs like a machine, efficient, thorough, unyielding. Its volunteers wear armbands, they carry clipboards, they ask questions, everything must be documented, every family accounted for, every blanket and loaf of bread tallied. Some people are grateful, others feel watched. You hear murmurs, complaints that the relief workers are too strict, too suspicious, that some families are denied because their answers don't match what's in the books, that others are told they've had enough, that their need has expired. There is growing tension here, quiet but deep. For many, this camp, this way of life, was meant to be temporary, but the weeks are slipping by, and the city rebuilds slowly. Bricks don't arrive fast enough as labour is scarce. The new codes are strict and building takes time, and so the camps endure. You pass a school tent, a large canvas enclosure marked with chalk. Inside, children sit on crates and stools, writing with broken pencils, reciting lessons half remembered by volunteer teachers. There is no bell, no blackboard, but there is order. One girl wears her father's coat. Another clutches a doll blackened by soot. They learn not only their lessons, but how to live among ruins, how to adapt to tight spaces, to rationed food, to the smell of smoke in their clothes. Across the path, a church service is being held in the open air. A preacher stands before a rough-hewn altar made of salvaged timber. He speaks softly, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind, but the people listen. Some sit on the ground, others stand with arms folded, eyes lowered. There is little fervour, no fire in the sermon, just a steady rhythm of comfort. A reminder that even here, in temporary housing with no doors or roofs, they are not forgotten. But the question that rises, unspoken and constant, is this: when will we go home? Some try to answer it in practical terms. They track the rebuilding efforts, the zoning changes, the availability of materials. You hear a man say that permits are being issued for new boarding houses. Another says his landlord is already laying foundation for a replacement tenement. But others grow sceptical. Prices are rising. Landlords, insurance companies, investors all begin to see opportunity in the absence of structure. Rents climb. Contracts are rewritten. Some of the working poor begin to suspect they will never return to the neighbourhoods they fled. You walk along the line of tents and see signs of this uncertainty. A woman has placed a flower pot beside her shelter, a single late bloom somehow surviving in the fall air. Another has drawn curtains across the open front of her lean-to, stitched from old dresses. A boy carves the shape of a house into the side of a barrel. These are small declarations. This is my home, even if only for now. But they carry a quiet defiance. The camps were meant to be temporary, but time, like ash, settles into every corner, and there are other pressures. The city is preparing for winter. Officials cannot allow thousands to remain exposed to the cold. A plan is drafted to construct barrack-style housing in open lots, a network of temporary wooden buildings, closely packed, cheaply built, but warm enough to last the season. Relief workers mark out areas where construction will begin. The families in those spaces are told to move again. Some comply, others resist. For many it feels like displacement layered upon displacement. The fire took their homes. Now bureaucracy moves them again, like shadows on a changing map. You watch as the first of the barracks go up, fast, sharp, bare. Rows of plank walls and iron stoves, windows cut with knives, roofs nailed down in haste. They are not homes, but they are shelter, and as the first snow threatens on the horizon, shelter is what matters. Still, The idea of home feels distant. For Chicago's wealthy, homes have already been rebuilt or rented elsewhere. New mansions are planned with fireproofing in mind. Whole districts untouched by the flames remain warm and lit. But for the working class, for the immigrants who once filled the narrow alleys and attic rooms of the North Side and South Market, home is still something imagined. Rebuilding may come, but not evenly, not all at once, and not always for those who lost the most. You leave the camp as evening descends, the cook fires casting low circles of light against the walls of canvas and wood. Somewhere, someone plays a fiddle, a child laughs, another cries. You walk slowly, past these flickers of survival, and feel the tension of a city suspended between memory and blueprint. It has cleared space for stone and iron, but it has not yet answered the deeper question. Where do its people belong? The city is rising, yes, but not all at the same pace. In the wake of destruction, stories gather like smoke, swirling, elusive, half seen but impossible to ignore. Chicago's fire is no exception. As the city tries to grasp the enormity of what has happened, it also seeks explanations, a narrative that can be held up like a beacon in the dark. You find yourself in the middle of these stories, watching them grow and twist like flames themselves. The most persistent tale is the one about Mrs. Catherine O'Leary and her cow. You hear it everywhere, in hushed tones on street corners, in heated debates at taverns, in the cautious pages of newspapers. The fire started in her barn, the story goes, when the cow kicked over a lantern. A simple accident, but one that swiftly grew into legend. You see her name carved into public memory, sometimes with sympathy, sometimes with blame. And the cow? It becomes a symbol of randomness, of the unpredictable spark that set everything ablaze. You imagine Mrs. O'Leary herself, an Irish immigrant, a widow living in a cramped wooden house on DeCoven Street. Her daily life was filled with work, tending animals, cooking, managing a household stretched thin by poverty and hard times. She was known to neighbours, but also subject to suspicion and prejudice, as many immigrants were. The fire's origin story gives the city a villain, a scapegoat, a way to make sense of chaos. But you also hear murmurs that the story may be more complicated, that the fire could have started elsewhere, that lanterns were common, that the barn was old and crowded, and that blame might be misplaced. The newspapers seize on the narrative with relish. Headlines scream about the cow that burned Chicago. Editorials speculate, editorialize, and sensationalize. The myth grows larger than life. Cartoonists sketch the image of a wide-eyed cow knocking over a lantern, smoke billowing behind her like a sinister cloud. The city, desperate for an answer, clings to the story. But deeper beneath the myth, you sense something more fragile and real. The fire was not the work of a single accident or one unfortunate animal. It was the culmination of years of risk, dense wooden construction, dry weather, inadequate water supply, narrow streets, and a system stretched to its breaking point. The cow story is easier to hold on to than those facts. It has a face, a beginning, a cause. It lets the city distance itself from the complex failures that led to disaster. At the same time, you encounter quieter tales, personal stories of loss and survival, of neighbours helping neighbours, of bravery and despair. A firefighter who stayed until his boots melted, a mother who carried her children through smoke-choked alleys, a shopkeeper who lost everything but returned the next day with buckets of water to help save the new bakery down the street. These stories don't make headlines, but they fill the air, layer by layer, and so the city listens, to myth, to memory, to rumour. The O'Leary barn burns in the imagination as much as it did in reality. The cow becomes a symbol, a talisman for an event too vast and terrible to comprehend fully. And in this telling, you feel the weight of how history is shaped, not just by what happened, but by how people choose to remember it. The myths will last for years, generations even. But here, in this moment, you see both the fire's flame and its shadow, what is known, what is assumed, and what remains uncertain. The city has lost much, but it has gained a story to tell, a story that will shape its identity, its memory, and the way it faces the future. The air has turned colder still, and with each breath you feel the shift, not just in temperature, but in the atmosphere of the city itself. Chicago, just weeks ago a city of ashen tents and trembling fear, is changing again. This time not with fire, but with decision, with intent. The ruins have been surveyed, the temporary shelters put in place. The myths are told and retold, wearing new shapes each time. But now the city's future is no longer an abstraction. It is being drawn, literally, into existence, in blue lines and inked signatures, in ordinances and bills and legal frameworks. You're standing in a moment when the abstract becomes steel. You find yourself near the lakefront, where a large tent has been erected to serve as a temporary office for the Board of Public Works. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of wet paper and lamp oil. Long tables hold maps and plans, many of them rough drafts, others covered in annotations and red stamps. Men in coats sit or pace, hunched over measuring tools and ledgers. They speak not with the chaos of emergency, but with the cool, careful tone of planners. They are designing a new kind of city. What is most remarkable is how quickly it is happening. The first citywide building codes are already being passed into law. You glimpse a copy of the new fire ordinance on a desk, its language dense and mechanical, but its message unmistakable. The city will not burn like this again. In the downtown district, now referred to increasingly as the burnt district, no wood frame buildings will be allowed, no tar roofs, no exposed timber. All new construction must be made of brick, stone or iron. Roofs must be covered in slate or metal. Chimneys will be regulated, staircases enclosed, windows reinforced. The rules are strict, and they mark a turning point. These are not merely safety measures, they are declarations. Chicago will rebuild as a modern city, a city of permanence, not a collection of kindling and improvisation, but a machine of commerce and structure. The skyline, though not yet rising, is already forming in the minds of these planners. You can almost see it. Walls of stone, wide avenues, bridges of iron crossing the river like the veins of a body, water towers stretching upward like sentinels. It will be beautiful but also severe, and it will not be cheap. You listen as contractors argue about the rising cost of materials. Brick is in high demand, and prices have doubled. Iron too. Labourers are working longer hours, but there are not enough of them to meet the growing demand. Stone must be shipped from quarries miles away. Lumber, though now restricted downtown, is still needed for scaffolding, supports, tools. Some fear that the new regulations will slow rebuilding or force out small businesses and poorer residents. The rules protect the city, but not everyone within it. You follow one architect out of the tent as he heads to a site just north of the river. He speaks with pride about a building he's designing. A bank, 5 stories tall, made entirely of stone and iron, with fireproof vaults and reinforced stairwells. He walks briskly through the mud, pointing out where support beams will rise, where walls will hold against flame, where the roof will channel water efficiently. To him, the fire is no longer a tragedy, but a challenge answered. His voice is calm, even excited. But when you turn a corner and enter a side street, the tone changes. A man stands on the remains of his old store, a grocer's shop, once made of pine and glass, now reduced to blackened bricks and warped metal. He holds a letter from the city, informing him that his permit for rebuilding has been denied. The structure he proposes is too narrow, the materials too flammable. He doesn't have the funds for brick. He doesn't have an architect. He stares at the spot where his counter once stood and says simply, "I guess it's not mine anymore." You leave him there, his boots sunk in the cold mud, and you realise something. The city's new skin is hardening, but in doing so it is shedding parts of itself. The old neighbourhoods of wood-frame cottages, crowded shops and tenement rows, those are not coming back, not in the same form. The fire allowed the city to start again, but not all pieces fit into the new design. Wealth will find a way forward. So will the large enterprises, the rail companies, the grain merchants, the banks. But others, the tailors, the labourers, the pushcart vendors, the families with 3 generations in one flat, will have to look elsewhere. Still, the work continues. Throughout the city, you see the first bones of this rebirth taking shape. New foundations are being poured, deeper, wider, stronger than before. Scaffolding rises where walls once crumbled. Wrought iron window frames are carted in by horse and wagon. The smoke-blackened bricks of old buildings are being scrubbed clean and reused. their past folded into their future. Chicago is becoming not what it was, but what it intends to be, and there is something else. A new tone, low and steady, behind all the clamour. Confidence. Not joy, not hope in the sentimental sense, but something sturdier. The belief that a city can shape itself through sheer will, that it can look at its own ashes and say, not again. You walk slowly through this shifting place, where the memory of fire still lingers in the air, but where the scent of mortar and wet stone is growing stronger. You know this is only the beginning, but for the first time, the future has a shape, and it is not made of wood. Beneath the low November sky, the city moves like a creature stirring after injury. The outlines of devastation remain, etched into the earth and memory alike, but already the bones of something new rise from within them. You stand on Madison Street, boots planted in cold mud, your breath curling visibly in the air, and before you stretches a vision being wrestled into existence. Not a return to what once was, but the birth of something else entirely. Around you, men with heavy coats and ink-stained hands talk about the future not as a hope, but as a blueprint. The names begin to surface now, men who, until recently, were draftsmen, builders, engineers, men of skill but not yet legend. You hear them mentioned with growing frequency in offices and newspapers, in the new rooms where the city's future is being imagined. William LeBaron Jenney, already known in professional circles, begins to whisper ideas about steel frameworks. John Wellborn Root and Daniel Burnham walk through the ruins with notebooks and tape measures, speaking quietly of space, light, and vertical strength. And above all, there is a growing idea, a shared, electric understanding, that fire has not only destroyed a city, but cleared the stage for a new form of architecture to emerge. The rules have changed, that much is clear. The old city was wood, haphazard, narrow, and low, built fast, built cheap. Chicago had been a frontier hub, a junction for commerce, railroads, grain. Its structures were practical but brittle, piled one atop the other in dense blocks of flammable ambition. Fire swept it all away in less than 2 days. Now there's a collective hunger to make permanence, to defy the very thing that laid the city low. You hear it again and again in the architects' offices, in meetings with city officials, in lectures and private salons. Fireproofing, durability, scale, and height. Height begins to matter in a new way. With the centre of the city flattened and land at a premium, upward becomes the only direction left to grow. Some whisper that buildings could rise not just 3 or 4 stories, but 10, 12, even 15. It seems absurd at first, but steel frames, fireproof materials and elevator technology, still new but rapidly improving, make the idea plausible. A quiet revolution begins, not just in style but in form. The groundwork is being laid, literally, for what will one day be called the skyscraper. But not yet. For now you walk through a city of scaffolds and sounds. The clang of hammers, the grind of saws, the bark of foremen fill the air in every district where permits have been granted. Everywhere you look, workers balance on beams, carry bricks by the hundreds, raise walls with a speed driven not by greed, but by necessity. Winter is coming fast and every open frame is vulnerable to the elements. Stone blocks are hoisted by pulleys, iron railings bent into place, cement poured even in near-freezing temperatures. The rebuild is a race against time, and ambition is everywhere. Wealthy businessmen, Marshall Field, Potter Palmer, George Pullman, each with deep pockets and deeper pride, stake their claims on the new Chicago with bold gestures. Palmer's new hotel, when completed, will stand at the corner of State and Monroe, grander and more fire-resistant than anything the city has seen. Field's department store rises again, cleaner, whiter, with high ceilings and an elegant, almost European interior. Their competition is not just commercial, but philosophical. They are making statements about permanence, about legacy. Each building is a monument to rebirth. You visit a construction site on Wabash Avenue, where a new office building is going up. The foundation is wider than any nearby structure, and the workers move with a sense of ritual. The foreman explains the material choices: terracotta cladding, fireproof steel interior, slate roofing. He points to a set of plans where windows are drawn wider than before, allowing more light into the upper floors. "We won't hide from the sky anymore," he says with a tired grin. It's poetic in a way. This city, once so low to the ground, is preparing to meet the heavens. Yet you also see the cost. The pressure to rebuild quickly means that corners are sometimes cut. Cheap brick is used where stone was promised. Some buildings go up too fast, their frames crooked, their supports questionable. Labourers, mostly recent immigrants, work long days with few protections and accidents are frequent. A man falls from a scaffold 2 stories up. Another is burned by quicklime. Their names don't make the paper, their injuries are absorbed into the pulse of progress, and still the city rises. In quieter moments, you walk past old plots where nothing has yet begun, where grass has started to grow through the ash. These are the in-between places, spaces caught between destruction and possibility. Children play in them, stray dogs sleep in the sun. Here, it is still possible to remember what the fire erased. You see the ghost outlines of homes and shops, the burned stumps of posts, the cracked flagstones that once marked someone's front step. These are reminders that the new city is not simply rising, it is rising over something else, something gone. You stop by one such plot near the corner of Clark and Harrison. A woman kneels there, wrapping an old iron key in cloth. She says it was the only thing left from her home. She's keeping it until the new house is built. Even if it doesn't fit the door, she says quietly, it was mine once. Her voice is not bitter, it is resigned, but it holds the weight of memory, of belonging. In the city's newspapers, you see illustrations of new buildings not yet built, advertisements for architectural services, manifestos about the future. A few writers begin to speak of Chicago not as a cautionary tale, but as a model, a city that turned fire into form, that answered disaster with design. The rest of the country watches with interest. If Chicago can rise, maybe any city can. The fire is no longer just tragedy, it is opportunity. You leave the building site as night falls, the lanterns casting wide yellow glows on the stone and iron bones of what is to come. The air smells of sawdust and cold metal. Somewhere, in the distance, a train whistles, and the sound echoes through the half-built canyons of this new urban core. It is becoming clear now, this is no mere reconstruction, it is a redefinition. By the end of winter, the smell of scorched wood has faded beneath the weight of smoke from new chimneys, fresh plaster, and coal fires roaring in temporary stoves. The air has changed, still bitter, still dry, but the scent that once screamed ruin now merely mutters reconstruction. As you make your way through the city's heart, you sense that the rhythm is different now. Where once there was panic, then planning, now there is motion. Steady, determined motion. Chicago no longer flails, it organises. The city government, overwhelmed in the early days, has reasserted itself. You pass by the newly restored City Hall, where men in dark coats climb the marble steps with firm strides. Inside, the halls echo with the voices of aldermen, inspectors, engineers, and clerks. Piles of permits, regulations, and tax assessments are neatly organised in wooden trays. Nothing is hurried, but nothing is still. Bureaucracy, for all its cold machinery, has taken hold of the chaos, and in its own way, it is building a framework as crucial as steel beams. Outside, you listen to the newsboys shouting headlines, new sanitation plans, water system overhauls, updates on zoning districts. Where once the fire had spread with no warning, now fire stations are being mapped with obsessive precision, their coverage calculated down to the street. The fire department itself is transforming. Steam-powered engines are replacing horse-drawn wagons. A telegraph alarm system is being tested, promising faster response times. You visit one of the new firehouses, where the smell of coal and oil clings to the air, and you see rows of helmets hanging beside glistening brass nozzles. These are not the firemen of last year, these are professionals trained, equipped and solemn in their readiness. But the rebuilding is not limited to structures and services. A deeper transformation is quietly taking place, one that spreads beneath the surface like roots through soft soil, the reshaping of class and order. You walk through neighbourhoods at the edges of the old burn zone, places like Pilsen, Bridgeport, and the far edge of the near west side. These districts, largely spared from the flames, now swell with those pushed out by fire and rising rents. Here, you see families crowded into hastily built frame houses, small brick cottages, or converted storefronts. laundry flaps from second-floor windows, children run barefoot between crates and barrels. There is laughter and labour here, but also pressure. Housing is tight. Wages are low. Many of these residents, Irish, German, Bohemian, Scandinavian, work in the very trades rebuilding the downtown. Bricklayers, stonemasons, glaziers, blacksmiths. Yet they cannot afford to live in the places they're restoring. They rebuild the banks, but sleep beside slaughterhouses. They tile the mansions, then return to narrow rooms with leaky roofs and broken doors. The fire, in its cleansing sweep, has cleared the physical slate of the city centre, but it has done nothing to equalise the lives of its people. Still, you see efforts, humble and scattered, to hold on to dignity. In one tenement, a woman has turned her cramped parlour into a schoolroom for children too young to work. She teaches them to read from a salvaged hymnal and a handful of illustrated papers. In another, a Lutheran minister tends to a soup kitchen at the back of his chapel, ladling out thick stew with the help of 2 teenagers who survived the fire orphaned. These are acts of quiet resistance against the slow sorting of the city, into those who ascend and those who are displaced. But in the city's heart, something colder is forming. You hear it in conversations among businessmen in hotel lobbies, in the private dining rooms above department stores, and in the editorials of the Tribune. They speak of order, efficiency, clean lines. There is talk of clearing the riverbanks of the squatters and the shanties, of replanning the street grid to erase the old winding alleys where immigrants once lived, of relocating the poor farther west, away from the new rail terminals and bank buildings. One evening, you find yourself in a smoke-filled hall where city officials, engineers, and a few wealthy patrons have gathered to hear a lecture on urban progress. A tall man in a waistcoat stands at the front, gesturing at a large canvas map of the city. His voice is calm but firm as he lays out his vision. Widened streets, uniform building facades, dedicated business zones, an elevated rail line. His language is clinical, efficient. Nowhere does he mention the word home. And yet, even in these moments, Chicago's chaos persists, if only just beneath the surface. Not every building fits the new codes. Not every plan can be enforced. Corruption seeps through the cracks like water through old stone. Inspectors are bribed. Shoddy materials sneak into solid-looking walls. Fires still spark, though none grow large. The city is not clean. It is not fair. But it is becoming something. It is shedding its skin, and you feel it most when you walk along the lake. Where once the shoreline was a clutter of warehouses and mills, now you see open space being carved out with measured care. Parks, promenades, green patches for the city to breathe. The lake, once used as a drain, is now being treated like a mirror, reflecting what Chicago might become if ambition continues to win over entropy. The fire brought devastation. That much remains true. But in its wake, something sharper has taken root. Not just a rebuilt city, but a reordered one. More rigid, more stratified, but also more purposeful. As you watch men survey land, carve stone, lay tracks and write laws, you realise this city is no longer reacting to the fire. It is remaking itself in its image. By early spring, the remnants of snow along the edges of the sidewalks have turned grey and heavy, and in the city's half-built skeleton, puddles collect between piles of brick and lumber. The streets are thick with churned earth and the steady clop of horses hauling stone. But the scent of new rain mingles with plaster dust and coal smoke now, and though everything feels still in transition, the rhythm is unmistakably forward. You find yourself standing outside a printing office on Randolph Street, where a stack of broadside sheets leans precariously against the wall, curling in the damp. One of the top pages reads in bold serif, "Mrs. O'Leary's cow to blame, says Chief." The headline is older now, several months out of date, but it's been passed around, copied and redrafted so many times it's become its own truth. It strikes you suddenly, how quickly a myth can take root in soil still warm from the ashes. You remember the first whispers, back in the smoky days right after the fire. A cow had kicked over a lantern, starting a blaze in the O'Leary barn. A domestic moment gone wrong, a single spark in the hay. The story had a rhythm to it, a simplicity that made it stick. The public seized on it not because it explained everything, but because it gave the fire a face, a name, a moment to point to, something to fold the unimaginable into a household tale. But the O'Learys, you learn, were poor Irish immigrants. Their neighbourhood was part of the first to ignite, a cluster of wood houses, barns, sheds. The fire spread rapidly there, not because of a cow, but because of conditions laid down long before that fateful night. Drought, wooden streets soaked in tar, a city without adequate water pressure, a fire department exhausted from earlier blazes that weekend, wind that blew with cruel precision. Still, the myth persisted. You walk along Decoven Street, what remains of it, past where the O'Leary cottage once stood. The lot is empty now, the original structure torn down and replaced by nothing. A few charred fence posts linger, absorbed by weeds. At a corner, two boys toss pebbles at a wall, one laughing. "That's the cow house." The other mimics a moo, his voice high and shrill, and you realise they've never known the real family. They only know the story. The scapegoat was convenient after all. Chicago, like any living thing, needed to name its demons to banish them. And the O'Learys, Irish, Catholic, poor, fit the prejudices of the moment. The newspapers, eager to sell copies, spun the tale until it hardened. Never mind that reporters never actually witnessed the cow, or that Catherine O'Leary, by all surviving records, had already gone to bed that night, or that she spent the rest of her years hiding from the public, her name treated as a punchline in songs, jokes and plays. You see her image on cheap posters sold at newsstands, a plump figure with a bonnet, a lantern and an angry cow in mid-kick, a crude cartoon, repeated until it replaces the truth. A woman turned into folklore, a disaster distilled into comedy. At a nearby saloon, a group of men gather over beer and cards. One of them tells a new version of the story. This time the cow is drunk or possessed or laying down with a cigar in its mouth. Laughter erupts and the details morph with each retelling. Everyone knows it didn't happen that way, but no one seems to mind. And yet, not all myths are meant to obscure. Some, you notice, are quietly forming with a different tone. A story, passed between engineers and merchants, of a city that rose from ash stronger than before. An idea that Chicago was not just restored, but reinvented. That the fire, though tragic, was a catalyst, painful but necessary. The Phoenix City, some begin to call it, reborn, resilient, indestructible. This myth, unlike the one of Mrs. O'Leary's cow, gains its strength not from simplicity, but from optimism, from ambition, from the American taste for struggle redeemed by greatness. It is equally constructed, equally exaggerated, but it serves a different purpose. It makes people believe that something better has emerged, not just in buildings and laws, but in identity. You attend a lecture at the Young Men's Club downtown, where a speaker declares, "Chicago is not defined by her fire, but by what she did after." His words are met with applause, and outside on the street you hear it repeated, among clerks, among bricklayers, even among children. The fire is no longer just an event, it's becoming origin, a place where history bends, where before and after mark a transformation. But you, walking the street still lined with scaffolding and half-set stone, understand something quieter. The myths serve their purpose, but beneath them, real lives continue. Catherine O'Leary remains in her small house, rarely seen, aging under the weight of public blame. The Phoenix metaphor lifts the city, but it does not ease the burdens of those who are displaced, who cannot afford the new rents or meet the new codes, and so the fire lives on in layers, as truth, as rumour, as legend. In boardrooms and courtrooms, in alley jokes and parlour songs, in sermons and editorials, it has become more than fire, it has become narrative, a tale the city tells itself, about guilt and glory, about cause and consequence. You stop beside a school where a group of children recite poetry, their voices thin against the wind. One stanza catches you. Where the embers slept, we built anew, brick and steel where timber grew. The city burned, and in her place a phoenix rose, with iron face. It's a children's rhyme, but it echoes something deep, something that now hums beneath every foundation and statute. The fire has passed, but its story has only just begun. The city expands not with shouts, but with the steady rhythm of tools, the creak of iron trolleys, the murmur of contracts signed and debts tallied. The fire's ruins no longer dominate the skyline. Now they linger only in photographs, in the memory of those who walked its glowing edges. In their place rise stone facades, cast iron cornices, warehouse rows and mansions dressed in marble. You begin to notice how the energy of rebuilding has shifted, no longer shared by all, but more finely distributed, narrowed by access, wealth, and privilege. The spirit of collective urgency that carried the first months has begun to fragment, replaced by something quieter and colder. The city is no longer simply rising, it is sorting. You walk north along La Salle, where wide boulevards stretch out, cleared of debris, bordered by rows of gas lamps waiting to be lit. Here the rebuilding has taken on a new pace, not frantic, not desperate, but deliberate. The buildings rise taller, more uniform, dressed in stone shipped in from Joliet and Indiana. Decorative facades glint in the afternoon light, pale grey against a brightening sky. Along these streets, people speak in the confident tones of regained control, merchants reopening offices, bankers installing safes in foundations still drying, hotel owners receiving imported tiles and silvered mirrors. But turn a corner, just one block west, and the tempo shifts. Here, the streets narrow, the sidewalks are uneven, still patched with boards and cinders. In back of the yards, or the lower edges of the near west side, families live in tight proximity, often 2 or 3 to a flat. You see men walking home in soot-covered coats, women standing in lines outside bread shops, children darting between wagons. These neighbourhoods didn't burn entirely, but they've absorbed the overflow, the displaced, the overlooked. The wealth of rebirth never quite reaches here. Instead, new problems settle in like dust. Rent prices, once modest, have ballooned. Landlords charge double or triple what they asked before the fire. The scarcity of housing allows it, and complaints fall into silence. Tenement owners, emboldened by demand, stuff more beds into fewer rooms, let the walls thin, let the floors warp. You visit one boarding house where 6 labourers sleep in a single room, their boots piled by the door like firewood. There are no safety inspections here, no promises of fireproofing, and while the city centre basks in innovation, steel framing, telegraph lines, water pressure systems, these districts wait. Promises are made, few are kept. At a political rally held in a half-rebuilt hall on Halstead, a city councilman speaks of balanced progress, his voice thick with conviction. Chicago's strength, he says, is her people, all of them, from lakefront to stockyard. But as the speech ends, and you watch the crowd file out under flickering gaslight, there's little sense that his words carry north or east. The applause fades quickly. No one stays to shake his hand, and so, 2 cities begin to form from one of stone, glass, and measured geometry. A place where new businesses thrive, where law offices and import companies rebuild with optimism. This Chicago is polished, organised, already looking outward toward global commerce, trade routes, national prestige. Here, the fire is remembered as a challenge met and conquered. The other city is stitched together from what remains: scavenged beams, loose clay bricks, tar paper roofs. It expands not upward, but outward, like a tide pushing to the edges. It holds the men who lay the bricks, the women who cook in fire-warmed kitchens, the boys who sell newspapers for pennies. Here, the fire is remembered as a wound, and the rebuilding feels like someone else's recovery. You visit a factory in the River West area, where boys no older than 12 haul bolts of fabric across rough floors. The foreman waves off your questions. They need the work, he says, and we need the hands. Outside, a woman boils laundry in an iron pot. You ask her if she feels the city has changed. She wipes her hands on her apron and glances at the skyline. For them, maybe, she says. For us, it's just higher rent and colder mornings. Yet even in the growing divide, there are places where the 2 Chicagos still touch. The streetcars link them, rattling over rails laid atop fire-blackened stone, connecting the working neighbourhoods to the business core. Along these routes, you watch men in threadbare jackets ride beside clerks in clean cuffs. The smells mingle. Coal smoke and perfume, machine grease and pipe tobacco. No one speaks much, but everyone watches the same city roll past the windows frame by frame, and sometimes, in quiet corners, acts of generosity resist the widening gap. At a small mission house on Adam Street, a group of women, wealthy, mostly widowed, serve meals to the displaced and the poor. They speak gently, ask no questions. One of them, with silver hair pinned high, touches your arm and says, "We mustn't let the fire only make us harder." It lingers with you, that phrase. Not everyone is retreating into safety. Some are pushing forward, not to rebuild only buildings, but to mend the unseen fractures in the city's body. You hear talk of schools for immigrant children, of health boards fighting outbreaks in the overcrowded wards, of journalists writing exposés on slum housing and labour conditions. These aren't the stories headlining the dailies, but they hum beneath the surface. Quiet resistance to the great sorting. The fire, it seems, burned more than buildings. It burned through illusions. It laid bare not only wood and brick, but structure. Who is protected, and who is not. Who is remembered, and who is asked to forget. As you walk home along the canal one evening, the city's shape stretches around you. The towers rise in the east, silvered in dusk light. Behind you, the shouts of workers echo down narrow alleys, and across it all, the wind moves, carrying soot, ambition, and the stubborn, mingled breath of two cities growing from one fire. Morning drapes itself across the city like gauze, pale, slow, and without urgency. Smoke rises lazily from the chimneys of foundries and boarding houses, drifting over the alleys and lakefront, softening the edges of everything. Beneath it, Chicago inhales deeply again, the breath of a metropolis that refuses to rest. The fire, now more than a year behind, has faded from most conversation, but not from the rhythm of things. You feel it in the pace of horses pulling stone, in the lean of scaffolding against buildings not yet named, in the eyes of men who have watched something vanish and are now determined to shape what replaces it. At the centre of this shaping is not fire but planning. Precision. A quiet revolution in ideas. You find yourself in a tall room near Michigan Avenue, newly furnished and already marked by the smell of ink and wax. Blueprints lie unfurled on large tables, their lines crisp, geometrical, methodical. Here, men speak not of destruction, but of grids, of symmetry, of long avenues meeting perpendicular boulevards. They talk of setbacks and drainage systems, of window heights and sewer depths, of zoning, not yet called that, but already understood in practice. The city is learning to discipline itself, and this room is its classroom. One of the men gestures you over, his coat dusted with chalk. It's not just rebuilding, he tells you, tracing a finger across the plan, it's rethinking. The fire didn't just give us a clean slate, it gave us a reason to design. It's true, in the place of haphazard streets and jumbled blocks, a new order is emerging. Fire codes now dictate materials. No more kindling for houses, no more tar-covered shingles or open wood facades. Stone, iron, brick. These are the new language of permanence, and behind it all, an unseen architecture of systems begins to take shape. You attend a council hearing, held in a brick-lined hall that still smells of mortar, where a proposal is read aloud for a new building ordinance. It's dry, almost droning, yet beneath the surface it pulses with intent. A minimum height for firewalls, window spacing for airflow, alley access for emergency wagons. These details are dull in the mouth but electric in implication. The city will never again be built with the same carelessness that allowed it to burn. Not if these men succeed. Outside, you visit a construction site, once the footprint of a hotel, now a rising office block clad in pale sandstone. The foreman explains how the foundations are deeper now, stronger, the beams treated, the stairwells wide enough for two men to pass with cargo. You listen and understand. It is not beauty they're chasing, it's resilience. But not everyone embraces this new order. You hear murmurs, on stoops, in coffee houses, beside church steps, that the rules benefit the powerful, that the permits are too expensive, that the codes serve the big builders, the landholders, the railroad men. For the small carpenter, the independent merchant, the immigrant trying to rebuild his family's home, these standards feel more like walls than protections. In the South Division, you meet a German brickmaker whose kiln was spared by the flames, but whose house was not. He's tried twice to rebuild, but each time his permits were denied. Too close to the next house, they told him. Wrong materials. He shows you his rejected plans, modest, practical, but non-compliant. They want stone? I cannot afford stone, he says. Then they say, go west. You realise the blueprint of the new city is not just a map. It is a filter, a shape that excludes as much as it defines, and slowly, without much notice, it begins to push the working poor away from the heart of Chicago, to the peripheries, to neighbourhoods without paved streets or public water. It does not banish them outright. It merely makes it harder to stay. Meanwhile, the skyline grows. You walk through the business district and see it. Taller buildings, facades dressed in cast iron and ornamented with stone reliefs. The architects talk of Chicago style now, a new aesthetic forming from necessity and confidence. Wide windows, practical lines, internal steel frames, beauty born of purpose, not opulence, offices built for commerce, not comfort, and yet, in their very strength, they evoke a kind of wonder. These buildings do not whisper, they declare. And for the first time, you hear a new word whispered among the engineers: skyscraper. It sounds audacious, futuristic. But the idea is already moving. Steel, elevators, vertical ambition. A city not just wider, but taller, hungrier. You see the vision in the eyes of the planners, the developers, the bankers. They do not intend for Chicago to merely rebuild, they want it to lead. At a dinner party hosted in a newly opened hotel ballroom, you overhear a speech by a visiting architect from New York. This city, he says, was reborn not in spite of fire, but because of it. Chicago has become a laboratory for the modern world. There's applause, toasts are made, and yet outside, on the wet stones of the street, a boy sleeps curled beside a steam grate, and two laundresses argue over who gets the job folding sheets for 10 cents a day. That's the thing about planning. It maps lines on paper, but life doesn't always follow lines. As you walk the evening streets, your path winds between contradictions, ornate department stores beside bread lines, street lamps casting golden halos beside shadows full of damp coats and worn boots, progress and exclusion in the same breath. In this moment, Chicago is a mirror, showing both the beauty of rebuilding and the harshness of redefinition, and yet, in every frame, it remains alive. The fire gave Chicago not just trauma, but choice, and the blueprint being drawn now, of brick, of steel, of power, will shape more than buildings. It will shape the future of American cities. It will teach others how to rise, how to regulate, how to look upward without forgetting what smoulders at the base, because rebuilding is never just about what is made, it is about who gets to stay. The first time you step into one of the new buildings rising along Wabash Avenue, you notice the shift instantly. It isn't just the feel of cool marble underfoot or the thin gleam of iron in the staircase rails, it's the air itself. Higher ceilings, broader windows, filtered light dancing on polished wood, and above all, space. The kind of space that suggests permanence, control, confidence. The ceilings echo faintly with the sound of boots and briefcases, the echo of a new Chicago. You pause near a window and look out at the spreading city. The rooftops ripple outward like scales on a massive, slow-moving creature. Plumes of smoke drift gently into the morning, some from trains, others from smokestacks. The sun breaks through in streaks, golden and oily, staining the lake with a strange warmth. Far below, streetcars rattle by, their bells soft and rhythmic. You imagine this view 10 years ago, before the fire, before the noise, before the hunger for height. Everything now feels taller, not just buildings, ambitions. The steel age has arrived, quietly at first, but now undeniable. No longer a tool, steel is becoming a philosophy. You visit the office of William LeBaron Jenney, called the father of the skyscraper by some. His latest project, the home insurance building, is the talk of engineers and architects across the country. 10 stories, iron frame, masonry, only for cladding, not structure. It sounds simple now, but to the world it's revolutionary. A building that does not carry its own weight on its walls, one that frees its bones from stone. You listen to Jenney speak, his voice gentle, patient. The fire, he says, gave us the necessity, but the steel, it gives us imagination. This is the pivot. Before the fire, buildings leaned on tradition. Now they lean on invention. Chicago becomes the proving ground. Architects flock here. Dankmar Adler, Louis Sullivan, a young Frank Lloyd Wright still scribbling ideas in the corners of drafting rooms. They come not just to build, but to define what a city can be. You sit in on a lecture at the Art Institute, still under construction, where a speaker declares that Chicago must not only grow, it must speak, in form, in function, in steel. But the steel doesn't only go into offices and towers. You ride out to the stockyards, still muddy, still pungent, and see it twisted into pens, gates and rails. You walk through train depots reinforced with the same techniques as downtown mansions, warehouses with steel beams supporting entire walls of inventory. Steel becomes invisible, yet omnipresent. Its sharp certainty underlies everything. It holds up the facade of rebirth. Yet the work of steel is brutal. In a yard west of Halstead, you meet a crew of men hauling beams into a half-framed building. Their hands are leathered with calluses, their eyes bloodshot from wind and long hours. One of them, a man from Poland named Marek, tells you he's had 3 friends fall in the last year. No rope, no safety, he says. They fall like bricks. You ask what keeps him here. He smiles, weary. Because in Chicago you build or you starve. At night you follow him and the others to a tavern. Small, dim, warm. Over thick glasses of beer, they talk about the fire like it was a storm, something that passed overhead, devoured everything, then moved on. After it burned, one man says, the city had to grow teeth, now it chews us up. They laugh, but not cruelly, just tired. Their pride isn't in the buildings themselves, it's in the fact that they lived to build them. Still the architects sketch endlessly. Diagrams and models fill their offices. You run your fingers along one, a plan for a vast train terminal with iron trusses and soaring arches. It looks like a cathedral, and in a way it is. A cathedral to motion, to progress. Steel as faith. In one studio, you come across Louis Sullivan's early notes, curved lines, organic forms. He writes in flowing script, form follows function. You sit with that phrase for a long time. In a city still smelling faintly of charred wood, those words feel like a warning and a promise. Yet even steel has limits. As new buildings climb, they cast long shadows. The streets grow darker, colder in their wake. The air thickens with coal dust and ash. Children cough more often. Sunlight thins. People begin to question, quietly, and never too publicly, whether height should be capped, whether the shadows can be managed. But for now, the momentum is too strong. The city rises because it can, because to pause would be to doubt the whole project. You visit a rooftop, 9 stories up, just before dusk. The air is cooler here, the wind less forgiving. Below, the city seems quieter, reduced to patterns, straight streets, red chimneys, yellow windows, and in the distance, Lake Michigan stretches out, indifferent and endless. You imagine what it looked like the night of the fire, glowing red in reflection, a city burning from the inside out. Now it gleams with steel spires and ambition. Chicago, you understand, did not just survive, it reinvented gravity, not only for itself but for cities across the continent. New York watches closely, so does St. Louis. Architects from Boston to San Francisco write letters asking for blueprints, measurements, principles. They want to know how it was done, how fire turned into form, how ashes became altitude. You descend the stairs slowly, your hand tracing the cool iron rail. Chicago is no longer a city recovering. It is a city experimenting, testing heights, testing human limits. From below, the buildings seem like mountains. From above, they are statements. And as you walk back out into the lamplit street, you feel the hum of steel in your chest. Quiet, certain, and impossibly strong. In the stillness of a dry October evening, the story flickers again. Not in flames this time, but in whispers. Among schoolchildren with their elbows on desks. Among tour guides with their soft-voiced routines. In the margins of newspapers and fading memoirs, the same name returns. Mrs. O'Leary. Her cow. The barn. The lantern. The spark. A single moment, blamed for 3 days of ruin. You walk along DeKoven Street where the story claims it all began. There is no barn here now, only pavement and the heavy sigh of traffic. The city has paved over its myths, but the story clings. It has become part of the foundation. You imagine her, Catherine O'Leary, Irish, Catholic, poor, tending her cows as the sun sets behind her tenement. You picture the moment, real or imagined, when the lantern tips, the hay catches, and the fire, greedy and relentless, begins its quiet crawl. But then, you wonder why. Why this story, this cow, this woman? You spend hours in the dusty corners of the public library, combing through early reports. The original article in the Chicago Tribune is thin on detail, speculative, almost flippant. The name appears only in passing, yet within days the public imagination latches on. Mrs. O'Leary becomes a symbol of carelessness, of foreignness, of blame. Cartoonists sketch her with wild hair and vacant eyes. Her cow becomes monstrous. Jokes multiply. Facts dissolve. The truth, as always, is quieter. Testimonies from the time contradict each other. Some say she was in bed when the fire started. Others say she wasn't home at all. The official inquiry never proved the origin. The case was closed without conclusion. And yet, her name remained. Not because it was true, but because it was useful. You speak to a local historian, her fingers ink-stained from hours spent restoring old documents. Mrs. O'Leary, she says, was never the cause. She was the scapegoat. A convenient figure at a time when the city needed answers, when people wanted to point, to punish, to tidy the story into something they could tell their children. It wasn't about her, she continues. It was about who she represented. Immigrant, poor, Catholic. Other. It's a pattern you begin to see more clearly now, how tragedy sharpens the lines between belonging and exclusion. The fire didn't just consume buildings, it exposed prejudices long smouldering beneath the surface. The Irish, already eyed with suspicion by Anglo elites, bore the brunt of blame. The narrative hardened. Chicago's Great Fire caused not by wind or drought or failed infrastructure, but by an Irish woman and her cow. It would take over a century for the city to formally absolve her, a symbolic gesture, buried in the back pages. You walk south along Jefferson, past the plaque marking the supposed ignition point. Tourists stop, take pictures, move on. It's a tidy story, easy to remember, easy to teach. But history, you've come to understand, rarely favours simplicity. The real causes were structural. Weeks without rain, wooden sidewalks, tar roofs, narrow streets, overburdened water systems. The fire was waiting to happen. It only needed a breath. But myth is louder than infrastructure. You attend a small lecture at a community centre, where a local folklorist explains the endurance of the O'Leary tale. It gives the fire a face, she says, a name, a kitchen, a cow, something domestic, understandable. She clicks through slides, comic depictions, advertisements, even a children's puppet show. The audience laughs, but the laughter carries unease. A story that begins in slander rarely ends in justice. Afterward, an older man approaches the speaker and says softly, "My great-grandmother knew her, said she never forgave the city. And how could she? Her name burned longer than any building. The deeper truth is this. Mrs. O'Leary became legend not because she caused the fire, but because she allowed the city to move on. By pinning guilt to one woman, the system escaped scrutiny. By focusing on a barn, no one had to answer for the lack of fire prevention, for the underpaid firefighters, for the building codes never enforced. Blame the cow, not the council." As you walk back through the streets, you wonder how many other stories remain beneath the surface. Not myths, but people, displaced, blamed, forgotten. You think of the shanty towns that formed after the fire, whole neighbourhoods of tents and lean-tos swept aside in the name of progress. Their names are not carved in plaques. Their homes were not sketched by architects. The fire's mythology simplified its chaos, but beneath that simplicity, the truth still breathes. At night, you sit in a quiet park just west of the loop. The wind moves through the grass in low whispers. Nearby, a plaque memorializes the fire, not its victims, but its triumph of spirit. You stare at the words and think again of Mrs. O'Leary, returning to her ruined home, watching a city recover while her name becomes something it never deserved to be. In the years to come, her image will be softened, romanticized. The cow will appear in parades, her barn will be recreated in miniature, but no monument will ever truly undo what was done to her memory. Chicago rose from the ashes, but only after deciding who would carry the blame, and so the fire did more than destroy, it rewrote. It selected its villains and heroes, it curated memory, and in doing so it taught America something, that how a city remembers its disasters often says more than how it survives them. In the months that followed the fire, as the smoke cleared and the embers cooled, the city began to hum with a new kind of energy, not frantic, not fearful, but persistent, steady, and oddly hopeful. Chicago had burned, but it had not broken, and beneath the blackened bricks and twisted timbers something else stirred. Opportunity. You begin to notice it first in the voices, on the corners, in boarding houses, along the docks. There's talk of jobs, of contracts, of crews forming and hiring and building without pause. What was once a crisis has transformed into employment. Bricklayers, carpenters, plasterers, teamsters, stonecutters, welders, painters, riveters. Suddenly, the city needs them all, and in great number. The fire had rendered thousands homeless, but it also created an unprecedented demand for labour. In the early mornings, you walk with groups of men toward work sites, their breath rising like smoke in the cold air, lunch pails swinging at their sides. Some are fresh off the train. Immigrants from Italy, Germany, Sweden, Ireland, newly arrived and eager. Others are sons of freedmen from the south, drawn north by rumour and promise. A few are women in disguise, wrapped tight in coats and caps, passing silently among the others, desperate for coin and bread. The city is transforming into a crucible, not just of industry, but of class and labour identity. In this new economy of rebirth, the worker becomes central. You visit one of the employment offices on Canal Street. Inside, the air is thick with sweat and dust. Names are called from behind a narrow window, and men shuffle forward, some nervously, others with the practised weariness of those who've done this too many times. The pay is low, the hours long, but it is work. A man named Josiah, formerly a schoolteacher from Ohio, now lays bricks for 12 hours a day. The fire took my books, he says, but it gave me bread. Outside, you speak with a woman named Magdalena who has taken up washing linens for a new hotel rising on the north side. Her children sleep in a church basement at night while she scrubs, bleaches and boils during the day. Before the fire, she says, they didn't hire women like me. Now they don't ask. Her hands are raw, the knuckles cracked, but she smiles. It's a hard world, but for a moment at least it has opened. In the warehouses along the river, crews unload shipments of granite and iron and timber. Everywhere, the fire has created an economy of urgency. Goods arrive faster. Rail lines buzz. Barges stack high with lumber from Wisconsin, coal from Pennsylvania, glass from Ohio. You hear in the voices of merchants the sense that Chicago isn't just rebuilding itself. It is becoming the centre of something larger, something national. You attend a meeting at a labour hall not yet formalised into a union, but already pulsing with shared purpose. The men, most of them masons, speak in a low, steady rhythm. There is talk of pay, of safety, of hours. We build their homes, their hotels, says one man, but when one of us falls, no one pays for the funeral. Heads nod. The fire, they agree, proved one thing clearly. The city needs labour more than labour needs the city, but it is not all solidarity. Fights still break out in boarding houses between ethnic groups, competing for the same jobs. Rumours spread about who gets hired first, who gets the better pay, who gets to stay when the work slows. Labourers are pitted against one another even as they lift the same beams, hammer the same nails, and overhead the business class watches, plans, calculates. You attend a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce in a newly built hall draped with velvet and warm with gaslight. Men in waistcoats speak of profit margins and freight capacity. They use the fire not as a tragedy, but as a starting point. The blaze cleared the rot, says one rail executive. Now we can lay the foundations right. He isn't speaking metaphorically. He means rail lines, grain elevators, warehouses, all now rebuilt with greater precision, greater speed, but he also means workers. The fire allowed Chicago's elite to restructure labour, streamline it, harness it. Before the fire, workers demanded fairness. Now they ask only for work. The desperation birthed by disaster has become a management tool. Still, the workers endure. You walk through the lower west side, through Pilsen, through Little Hell, and see makeshift dormitories crammed into former stables. You smell the coal smoke that stains every blanket. You hear lullabies sung in Polish, in Italian, in Yiddish, in tongues born far from the lake, but now echoing beside it. The city is full of languages, and each speaks the same dream: stability. At night, you help haul buckets of water for a crew working a second shift by torchlight. Their hands are blistered, but their voices rise in song. Not because they are joyful, but because singing is what keeps the exhaustion at bay. and in those harmonies something resilient thrums beneath the soot. You come to understand that the Great Chicago Fire didn't only destroy, it rearranged the order of work. It accelerated urbanization, it institutionalized industry, it birthed new forms of dependency and, in time, resistance. Within a few years, some of these labourers will organise, they will strike, they will demand what they now suffer to earn. They will remind the city that those who build cannot be ignored, but for now they hammer and stack and haul in silence. They eat beans by lamplight, they sleep on cots that groan beneath their weight, they wake before dawn and work through dusk, and every nail they drive, every wall they lift, becomes part of the city's new skeleton. This is how a modern workforce was born, not in factories alone, but in ashes, not in theory, but in muscle and blister and breath. And as you step back and watch another wall rise, you see it clearly. Chicago is being rebuilt by hands that history may not name, but whose fingerprints will remain on every stone. In the quiet corners of city offices, beneath the dust of charred maps and the creak of heavy drafting tables, Chicago's second great fire was beginning. Not one of flame and smoke, but of ink and measurement, of boundary and vision. What the first fire destroyed, this one would redraw. You find yourself among city engineers and architects, their sleeves rolled up, hunched over blueprints lit by oil lamps. Their voices are soft but certain. They speak of grids, of zoning, of sewage, and stone. In this room, the future is not made of dreams. It's measured in feet, plotted in lines, ruled and scaled and framed into existence. This is where the true reshaping begins. You walk through a reconfigured city, though at first you barely notice it. The old irregular streets, those twisted relics of wagon paths and foot trails, are vanishing. In their place, the grid expands, clean and confident. Roads are widened, intersections are squared, alleys are ordered with a surveyor's eye. Even the spaces between buildings are codified now, regulated by ordinances newly passed in the wake of the fire. You trace your fingers along a city plan tacked to the wall, each square a promise of control. It is urban planning born from calamity. One of the planners, a thin man named Joseph who speaks with clipped precision, tells you the fire was a gift, because it gave us the right to start over without apology. He's not unkind, but his words chill you. To him, and others like him, the city before the fire was a mistake. Too chaotic, too crowded, too immigrant, too combustible. Now, they can erase that history with paper and pen. Their ideal is a city of function, segregated by purpose, streamlined by design. They speak of fire breaks, green spaces, ventilation corridors. They sketch not only for beauty, but for discipline. They plan boulevards wide enough to stop a blaze in its tracks, parks that can serve as gathering places but also fire gaps, streets that run straight and uninterrupted, slicing through former slums like blades. And behind their quiet voices is a certainty. This city, rebuilt on reason, will not burn again. You watch as they redraw the location of markets, pushing them farther from downtown. You see them approve new building codes, thicker walls, stone over wood, fireproof roofing. Insurance agents begin carrying measuring tapes in their pockets, checking setbacks, checking exits. An entire language of prevention begins to emerge, shaped by soot and fear. Yet with every revision, something is also removed. Entire neighbourhoods are deemed unfit to return. Formerly vibrant districts, crowded with working-class homes, are zoned for warehouses or industry. Immigrant families who once lived in the shadow of State Street find their land now earmarked for commerce. There are no forced evictions, not openly, but permits are denied, rents rise, owners are pressured to sell. The fire becomes a lever, used quietly to lift some to displace others. In one city file you see a notation: area cleared by fire, opportunity for reclassification. You visit the south side, where communities of African American families and Eastern European immigrants live in temporary housing. They petition for permanent building rights, but are told their lots fall within a new industrial corridor. A Polish woman, her hands calloused from laundering, shows you the letter denying her building permit. Her husband died in the fire. Now the land he worked for belongs to someone else's blueprint. Still, the planners push on. They adopt Daniel Burnham's early ideas: grand boulevards, lakefront parks, monumental public buildings. Though the famous plan of Chicago will come later, its seeds are sown here, in these ashes. The idea that a city can be not just restored, but perfected. That disaster is not a failure, but a blank page. You attend a public hearing where a committee debates the rebuilding of the downtown core. A merchant stands and pleads for the restoration of his block on its original footprint. A planner replies with a soft voice, "Your store no longer fits." There is no outrage, no protest. The city's momentum has made such resistance obsolete. Yet beneath the ordered lines and bold intentions, the old city still pulses. Street vendors return. Children play in lots not yet claimed by blueprints. Churches rebuild with parishioner hands. Immigrant clubs meet in basements, singing the same songs they sang before the fire. These lives do not appear on the city's new maps, but they are still here, stitched into the spaces between plans. In one particularly narrow alley behind Dearborn, you find a small garden. 3 rows of beans, 2 chickens, and a clothesline fluttering in the breeze. A man tending it nods to you. "They planned for everything," he says with a smirk, "except where I'd plant my beans." You laugh quietly, because you know he's right. No plan, no matter how precise, can fully erase the city it hopes to replace. And so the fire becomes both a line in the sand and a tool in the hand. It divides what came before from what is to come. It justifies intrusion. It offers the illusion of total control. But beneath the red lines, life is still unruly. As you leave the city planning office late one afternoon, the sun sets through the scaffolding of half-finished towers. Workers descend in silhouettes, their boots echoing on fresh pavement. You look down at the map still in your hands, and then back at the street. The lines are neat, the reality is not. Chicago is becoming a city of ambition, but also of tension, of winners and vanished voices, of vision and its unintended costs. The fire did not just clear space for new buildings, it cleared space for new rules. Rules that will shape the American city for generations to come. As the city's blueprint took shape on paper, so too did its silhouette in the smoky morning light. You find yourself drawn to the edges of construction sites where skeletal frames of steel rise like silent sentinels against the sky. The fire had cleared the way not just for new streets and regulations, but for an architectural revolution, one that would transform Chicago from a wooden town into a city of steel and glass. You walk past piles of lumber and bricks and watch men hoist heavy girders into place, their movements precise but slow, almost ritualistic. The air smells of sweat, coal and fresh-cut timber, mingled with the sharp tang of hot rivets. Every clang echoes like a heartbeat, slow and steady, marking the pulse of a city being reborn. In the distance, steam whistles pierce the dawn, signalling the arrival of more materials, more workers, more hope. Amid this industrious hum, a new breed of builders emerges, the architects and engineers who dare to dream upward. Among them, a man named William LeBaron Jenney stands out. His vision is radical for the time, buildings that can rise higher than ever before, thanks to steel frameworks that carry the weight instead of heavy stone walls. You hear whispers of his new skeleton method, which promises to make skyscrapers not only possible but safe. You visit one of Jenney's early projects, the home insurance building, standing modestly yet proudly at its site. Though only 10 stories tall by today's standards, it is the tallest building in the city, and possibly the world. As you step inside, you sense the significance beneath the quiet. This is a building not just of bricks and mortar, but of ambition. The fire had taught Chicago the terrible cost of flammable materials. Now, the architects seek to defy flame itself. Masonry clads the steel frame. Windows are made larger to welcome light and air, and fireproof stairwells are built into the design. The city's recovery is not just physical but technological. Innovation becomes a shield as well as a promise. You watch as other architects join this new movement. Louis Sullivan, Daniel Burnham, John Root. Each brings a vision of a modern city where function and form intertwine, where office towers become monuments to industry and progress. They sketch in charcoal and ink, arguing late into the night over proportions and aesthetics, torn between tradition and invention. These men and their ideas don't just change Chicago's skyline, they change architecture worldwide. The term skyscraper enters the American lexicon here, born from necessity and imagination. The fire cleared the old, and now their designs reach for the clouds. But for every soaring tower, there are countless smaller homes and shops still made of wood, still vulnerable, the city rebuilds unevenly. Gleaming new offices rise in the loop, while some neighbourhoods cling to fragile wooden frames. The memory of fire lingers in the wary eyes of residents who watch construction crews work day and night, knowing that safety is still a fragile promise. You talk to a mason named Patrick, a second-generation Irish immigrant. He points toward the rising towers. They build up high now, he says, but the work is the same: brick, steel, sweat. He pauses, then adds quietly, but up there, they make money we'll never see. The city's recovery is a paradox, a renaissance for some, a struggle for others. The skyscraper is both a symbol of rebirth and a reminder of inequality. The men who design the city's new face often have little connection to the labourers who build it. As evening falls, you find yourself on the lakefront, watching the lights begin to twinkle in the newly rebuilt downtown. The fire's devastation seems distant here, softened by the calm water and the gentle lapping of waves. Yet the city's heartbeat remains strong beneath the surface. You realise that the Great Chicago Fire did more than consume a city. It ignited a transformation. From the ashes rose not just buildings, but ideas that would define the modern metropolis. Chicago would become a laboratory of innovation, a place where architecture reached for the sky and technology reshaped daily life. But beneath the steel and glass, the story is still one of human hands, of countless lives rebuilt, reshaped, and sometimes overshadowed. The skyline grows, but the city beneath it remains a tapestry of struggle, ambition, and resilience. And so, the fire's legacy is etched not only in stone and steel, but in the very spirit of a city learning to rise again. As Chicago's skyline stretched upward, the city was also reshaped by laws born from the lessons of 1871's devastating fire. You find yourself moving through the quiet, wood-panelled rooms of City Hall, where clerks and lawmakers draft new codes with careful deliberation, voices hushed beneath the ticking of brass clocks and the rustle of paper. The smoke and ruin had demanded more than bricks and steel. It demanded rules, a framework to prevent history from repeating itself. You watch as committees debate building materials, fireproofing standards, and the responsibilities of landlords and owners. These conversations are long and complex, infused with urgency and the ghosts of the past. They speak of limiting wooden construction, mandating brick or stone, of fire escapes and sprinklers, of wider streets to act as fire breaks. The city is trying to write safety into every corner, every foundation. One official, a stern man named Henry, explains to you how these laws will protect future generations. "We cannot rebuild as before," he says quietly. "The fire was our reckoning. These codes are our promise." Yet you see a flicker of doubt in his eyes. There are limits to what law can achieve in a city so alive, so sprawling, so diverse. You learn that the regulations also extend to firefighting itself. The city invests in new equipment, steam-powered fire engines that hiss and groan, ladders longer than ever before, and a more organised fire department trained for rapid response. You hear stories of volunteer brigades giving way to professional firefighters, trained to meet the scale of disasters now possible in a growing metropolis. Yet even as these measures take shape, the challenges remain. Buildings erected before the code's passage still stand, fragile, flammable relics of a lost era. Property owners sometimes resist costly upgrades. Fires still flare, though smaller and more contained, reminding the city that the threat is never truly gone. You visit the city's archives, where records of fire inspections and building permits fill dusty shelves. There you find personal letters from residents pleading for safer conditions, as well as reports documenting violations and fines. The tension between regulation and reality is palpable, but the laws also sow the seeds of modern urban governance. Chicago becomes a model for other American cities, a blueprint in policy as well as architecture. Fire insurance companies pressure builders to comply. Engineers design safer infrastructure. Public health officials push for sanitation improvements alongside fire prevention. The fire's destruction expanded the city's vision, not only of what buildings could be, but what government's role in the city should become. At night, you stroll through neighbourhoods where gas lamps glow softly on sidewalks, the quiet broken by the occasional rumble of a horse-drawn fire engine responding to a call. The new ordinances give a sense of order, but the city remains unpredictable, a place of constant flux and challenge. You reflect on how the fire, while a catastrophe, also catalysed progress. It forced a reckoning, not just with bricks and timber, but with the systems that shape urban life. It taught Chicago and America that safety and growth must be planned together, that laws must evolve alongside ambition. Yet you sense, too, that these changes came at a price. The fire's legacy is not only in rebuilding, but in control, in decisions about whose homes would be allowed and whose would be erased, in the balancing act between freedom and regulation. Walking past a newly built schoolhouse framed in brick and stone, you consider the lives lived in this transformed city, how people adapt to rules made for their protection, but also learn to live around them. The city breathes in laws and bricks alike, shaped by both human will and the memory of flame. The fire is still present, not in smoke or flame, but in every law that keeps the city standing. It remains a silent force, a lesson etched into Chicago's very foundation. In the smoky aftermath of destruction, stories began to take shape, whispered at first, then shouted across newspapers and whispered again in parlours, taverns and on street corners. These tales swirled like embers on the wind, colouring the fire's legacy with legend and blame. You find yourself sitting in a dimly lit parlour where an elderly man, his face lined and voice soft, recounts the most famous of these stories, Mrs. O'Leary's cow and the barn that sparked the blaze. The tale goes that on a restless night, as the wind howled and the city slumbered unaware, a cow belonging to Mrs. Catherine O'Leary kicked over a lantern in her barn, setting the wooden beams and dry hay ablaze. The fire spread quickly, unstoppable and furious, consuming all in its path. You listen carefully, but the man's tone carries a hint of doubt. The city wanted a villain, he says, someone to blame when the flames showed no mercy. Mrs. O'Leary's cow was an easy story, simple to understand. You've read the reports. The Chicago Tribune printed the story the day after the fire, but later admitted there was no proof. Mrs. O'Leary herself never confessed, and historians still debate the true cause. Some say the fire began elsewhere, perhaps a stray spark from a nearby chimney, or careless work by a night watchman. The truth is lost beneath ashes and time, yet the myth endures. In the crowded streets you see posters and hear gossip. Mrs. O'Leary is cast as a negligent immigrant woman, her cow a scapegoat for a city's grief and fear. The narrative fits a pattern, blaming the other, the working class, the Irish immigrant who struggles to find acceptance. It is easier to name a culprit than to confront systemic failures, flammable buildings, inadequate firefighting, unchecked urban sprawl. The myth spills over into popular culture. You hear it in plays and songs, see it in prints and cartoons, always with the cow portrayed as a bumbling beast, and Mrs. O'Leary as a careless figure. It is a story of guilt and punishment, wrapped in simple morality. Yet, as you walk through neighbourhoods rebuilding from the rubble, you sense a quiet defiance beneath the legend. Some speak of Mrs. O'Leary with sympathy. She lost her home and livelihood, like thousands of others. Others reject the tale outright, insisting the fire was an accident of nature and neglect, not a crime of a single woman or her cow. You visit a small museum dedicated to the fire. Among charred artifacts and photographs, there is a section on myth and memory. A curator tells you how myths serve a purpose. They help a city grieve, make sense of chaos, and find order in disaster. But they also obscure truth. You realise that the story of the cow is not just about fire. It is about identity, blame, and the ways communities wrestle with trauma. It shows how history is shaped not only by facts, but by the stories we choose to tell. As dusk falls, you stand outside where the O'Leary barn once stood, now replaced by a modest brick building. The wind moves gently through the trees, carrying the faint scent of smoke from a distant chimney. The city moves on, but the myth lingers, an ember in the collective memory, and in that ember glows a lesson, that history is never simple, and that the truth often burns beneath layers of stories waiting to be uncovered. In the quiet spaces between the city's roaring reconstruction, you find the lives most deeply touched by the fire, those who survived its fury and who now carry its shadows with them. The fire was not just a spectacle of destruction, it was a fracture in thousands of personal histories, a sudden and irrevocable rupture that changed the course of individual lives forever. You walk through temporary camps that have sprung up on the outskirts of the ruined districts. Families live in tents, makeshift shanties and repurposed railcars, their faces weary but resolute. Smoke still lingers faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of damp earth and fresh timber. Children play amid the rubble, their laughter fragile against the backdrop of loss. You speak with a woman named Mary, whose small wooden home was swallowed by the fire. Her hands are calloused from labour, her eyes soft but steady. We lost everything, she tells you quietly, but we still have each other. She points to a patchwork quilt spread over a rough wooden table. This was made from our old clothes. It's a small piece of what we once were. The trauma of the fire lingers in the way people talk. Careful, deliberate, as if the flames might still leap back to life in their words. Many survivors recount the panic, the desperate rush to save possessions, the cries in the night. Some speak of family members lost, others of the kindness of strangers who opened their doors or shared what little they had. Yet beneath the resilience is a thread of pain. The fire forced displacement on a scale the city had never seen. You watch as families move from camp to camp, seeking stability in a landscape still scarred and uncertain. Some speak of broken dreams and uncertain futures, of jobs lost and neighbourhoods erased. You learn of volunteer aid groups, churches, charitable organisations and immigrant associations that band together to provide food, clothing and shelter. Their work is tireless but overwhelmed, a fragile net beneath a vast, gaping wound. The fire unites many in grief, but also reveals the fractures of race, class and ethnicity that mark Chicago's social fabric. In one tent, an elderly man tells you about the fire's impact on his Irish immigrant community. "We came here for work and hope," he says softly, "but the fire tried to take that from us. Still, we hold on." You visit a rebuilt neighbourhood where wooden houses have been replaced by brick row homes. The streets are quieter now, but the memory of the fire shadows every step. Some residents have left Chicago for new towns, carrying with them stories of the fire like scars. At the same time, you notice small acts of renewal. A repaired window here, a replanted garden there. Life presses forward, slow but determined. The fire's destruction reshaped not only the city's skyline, but its very soul. Behind the grand buildings and new laws are the quiet stories of loss and survival, the human cost of rebuilding. In these stories you hear the true echo of the fire, one not of roaring flames but of enduring spirit. And as you walk away from the camps, the smoke fades in the distance, replaced by the steady hum of a city that will never forget. As the city around you begins to rise from ashes, you turn your attention to a quieter but no less vital transformation: the economic upheaval wrought by the Great Chicago Fire. The blaze didn't just consume homes and streets, it tore through livelihoods, industries and dreams, forcing Chicago's economy to shift and adapt in profound ways. You find yourself walking down Wacker Drive, the river shimmering beside you, surrounded by new construction sites buzzing with labour. The fire destroyed roughly 1,700 buildings, including factories, warehouses and shops, over $200 million in property damage in 1871 dollars. Thousands lost their jobs overnight. But from this devastation grew a remarkable story of resilience and reinvention. In the weeks following the fire, you overhear conversations among merchants, bankers and labourers who gather in hastily arranged meetings. Credit lines are strained, insurance companies struggle to pay claims, and investors debate whether the city can truly recover. Some speak of bankruptcy and ruin, others whisper of opportunity. You meet Samuel, a dry goods merchant whose store was consumed by the flames. His hands are rough, his voice measured as he talks about rebuilding his business from nothing. "The fire took my shop," he says, "but it didn't take my will." With help from a newly formed relief fund, he plans to reopen on State Street, joining others who see the fire as a brutal reset. Around you, industries are realigning. Meatpacking firms, once cramped into unsafe quarters, take advantage of the destruction to build larger, more modern plants farther south. Railroads expand rapidly, bringing in materials and connecting the city more deeply to the nation. The fire sparks innovations in construction materials. Steel beams, fireproof bricks, and terracotta facades become standard. Banks and insurance companies, battered but determined, also reorganize. The insurance industry in particular learns painful lessons about risk, tightening policies, and creating new standards that ripple across the country. The influx of capital is staggering. Chicago attracts investors from across the nation and abroad, eager to participate in what becomes one of the largest rebuilding efforts in American history. You witness the formation of new enterprises, construction firms, architectural offices, and manufacturing plants that will drive economic growth for decades. Yet beneath this recovery lies inequality. While some merchants and industrialists prosper, many labourers find themselves underpaid and overworked. Labouring in dangerous conditions, the fire's aftermath exposes the harsh realities of rapid urban growth, the chasm between wealth and poverty. You walk past long lines of workers waiting for jobs, hear whispers of union organising and unrest. The city's population swells as displaced families and newcomers arrive, eager to claim their place in this reborn metropolis. At the same time, you notice how the fire reshapes commerce itself. Retail districts shift and modernise, department stores rise, and advertising begins to fill newspapers with bold promises of quality and convenience. Chicago becomes a hub not just of industry, but of consumer culture. In the fading light, you stand on the steps of a newly rebuilt bank, its stone facade gleaming. This institution, like many others, symbolises more than financial strength. It represents the city's determination to rise, to harness disaster, and turn it into prosperity. The fire's economic embers smoulder beneath the city's surface, fueling growth and innovation, but also illuminating the persistent struggles of a metropolis still learning to balance ambition with equity. And as the night settles, you realise that Chicago's story is one of endless reinvention, shaped by fire, fueled by hope, and driven by the unyielding spirit of its people. Amidst the clatter of hammers and the rising skyline, you begin to notice that the fire's aftermath was not only a physical reconstruction, but also a profound social reckoning. Chicago in 1871 was a city of many communities, layered with racial and ethnic tensions, inequalities, and hopes that the fire both revealed and reshaped. As you walk through the neighbourhoods on the city's south side and west side, you feel the undercurrent of uncertainty. African American residents who had begun settling in Chicago decades earlier find themselves facing not only the destruction of homes, but also new barriers in rebuilding. Many black families lived in areas hardest hit by the fire, and displacement deepened the challenges they faced in finding shelter and work. You sit quietly on a worn bench in a park where groups gather to discuss aid and support. An older man named Elijah tells you about the dual struggle faced by black residents, losing property and livelihood to the fire, but also facing discrimination from relief agencies and landlords. The fire burns down the buildings, he says, but prejudice keeps us from rebuilding on equal ground. You hear about relief efforts by black churches and community leaders who organise food drives, temporary housing, and employment networks. These communities become self-reliant out of necessity, creating support systems where the city's aid falls short. The fire exposes deep racial divides and unequal access to resources. At the same time, you notice that new waves of immigrants, Irish, German, Scandinavian, are also grappling with rebuilding their lives amid competition for jobs and housing. Ethnic enclaves rebuild cautiously, their streets now etched with fresh scars but also with determination. You observe how some neighbourhoods, previously racially mixed or working class, become more segregated after the fire, as discriminatory housing policies take root. Redlining and restrictive covenants, though not yet formalised, begin to shape patterns of settlement that will haunt Chicago for decades. Yet you also find moments of solidarity. Some relief organisations push for inclusivity. You attend a meeting where activists and religious leaders advocate for fair treatment of all survivors, regardless of race or origin. Their voices rise softly but steadily, urging the city to build not just new buildings but new social bridges. Walking past a rebuilt schoolhouse with children of different backgrounds playing together, you sense the fragile hope for a more integrated future. But the city's wounds run deep, and the fire's legacy is tangled with the complexities of race, class, and power. You realise that rebuilding Chicago is not only a task of masonry and steel, but also of community, of confronting prejudice, forging alliances, and dreaming beyond the shadows of destruction. The fire cleared the old landscape, but the social fabric was still unravelling, waiting for threads of justice to be woven in. As the sun sets behind a newly erected church steeple, you stand amid the hum of a city both fractured and fertile, poised between the past's pain and the promise of renewal. As the city pulses with the energy of reconstruction, your footsteps lead you into the bustling offices and studios where Chicago's new architectural vision takes shape. The Great Fire did not just clear space, it opened a blank canvas for innovation, inviting architects and engineers to imagine a city reborn from ashes and fireproof dreams. You enter a spacious drafting room, sunlight filtering through tall windows, illuminating tables scattered with blueprints and sketches. Men and women, mostly men, as was the custom, bend over their drawings, their hands steady and precise. The air smells faintly of ink, wood, and fresh paper, a quiet contrast to the distant hammering and saws outside. You meet William LeBaron Jenney, often called the father of the skyscraper. He explains how the fire's destruction inspired a radical rethink of urban building. We needed to build taller, yes, he says, but also safer, stronger. He shows you a model of a skeletal steel frame, a revolutionary idea that would support buildings far higher than ever before, while reducing the risk of fire spreading through wooden beams. Jenney's vision is both practical and poetic, a new kind of city rising not on fragile timber, but on iron and steel bones, wrapped in fire-resistant brick and terracotta. This innovation allows for more light, air and space, transforming the urban landscape and economy. You watch as architects debate styles, some favouring the classical revival, others leaning into the emerging Chicago school style, emphasising function and structure over ornate decoration. The city becomes a laboratory for architectural experimentation, its ruined plots fertile ground for bold ideas. You stroll to the construction sites where these blueprints come alive. Workers pour concrete and lay bricks in neat rows, guided by foremen whose eyes scan the horizon, imagining a skyline that will one day stretch miles into the sky. The fire's memory is present in every measure taken for safety. Wider streets, fireproof partitions, and stairwells designed for rapid evacuation. Among these architects and builders, you find a sense of purpose and hope. The fire was a brutal teacher, but it also opened the door to progress. New building codes, new materials, new techniques coalesce into a vision of a modern metropolis, one where fire would no longer hold the city hostage. Yet you notice tensions simmering beneath the surface, between preserving old neighbourhoods and embracing new designs, between profit-driven developers and public interests. The city is growing rapidly, and decisions made now will shape its character for generations. As dusk settles, you stand on a rooftop terrace overlooking the partially rebuilt cityscape. The outlines of new buildings shimmer against the fading light. You feel the pulse of a city rising again, not just from ashes but from ideas, ambition and resilience. The architects of renewal are more than designers. They are the city's dreamers and builders, crafting not only structures but the future itself. And in their hands, Chicago will rise, tall and strong, forever transformed by the fire that once threatened to consume it all. The fire's flames may have long since cooled, but their lessons continue to ripple through Chicago and beyond, quietly guiding how cities grow, how people live, and how communities prepare for the unexpected. You find yourself wandering through the city's expanding neighbourhoods, where new technologies and practices, born in the fire's shadow, are becoming woven into daily life. The first and most visible change is the fireproofing of buildings. Brick and stone replace wood as the dominant materials. You notice details often overlooked before: the metal shutters on windows designed to contain flames, the fireproof doors separating stairwells, and the new rooftop water tanks ready to douse sparks before they spread. The very design of buildings shifts, with fire safety embedded in every corner. At the same time, city planning begins to take on new meaning. Streets are widened not only to accommodate growing traffic but to act as fire breaks, helping to contain future blazes. Parks and open spaces are integrated as natural barriers and places of refuge. You walk along Michigan Avenue, noting the deliberate space between buildings, a buffer against disaster. You overhear discussions among city officials about emergency preparedness. Fire drills become routine in schools and factories. Communication networks improve, with telegraph lines and alarm systems connecting neighbourhoods and firehouses more effectively. The fire department itself grows into a professional force equipped with steam-powered engines and trained crews, ready to respond at a moment's notice. You visit a fire academy where recruits learn both the art of firefighting and the science of fire behaviour. Trainers emphasise teamwork, discipline, and the use of new technologies, reflecting a commitment to prevent the kind of chaos witnessed in 1871. Beyond infrastructure and emergency services, the fire's lessons permeate public consciousness. Newspapers run editorials urging caution with fire, and schools teach children about fire safety. Communities organise neighbourhood watches and mutual aid groups, recognising that preparedness is a shared responsibility. You also sense the fire's influence spreading beyond Chicago. Urban centres across America study the city's rebuilding efforts, adopting similar codes and technologies. The fire serves as a catalyst for a nationwide re-evaluation of urban design and safety, highlighting the need for resilience in the face of natural and human-made disasters. Walking through a newly constructed library, you find a quiet space filled with books and plans, testaments to the knowledge gathered from tragedy. The city's architects, engineers and planners continue to learn and innovate, mindful that the fire's devastation is a warning etched into history. As evening settles, you stand near the Chicago River, watching reflections shimmer on the water's surface. The city before you is transformed, stronger, wiser, and shaped by the hard-earned lessons of fire and loss. In this quiet moment, you understand that the fire was not only a destroyer, but a teacher, one whose lessons continue to protect and inspire. And so, the story of Chicago's fire lives on, not just in monuments or memories, but in every safe building, every prepared community, and every life shaped by the wisdom forged from flame. As the city's skyline gradually climbs higher, you sense that the Great Chicago Fire did more than just reshape bricks and mortar. It ignited a spirit of innovation that would ripple far beyond the city's borders. Walking through newly opened streets and bustling markets, you begin to understand how the fire's devastation became the spark for technological and cultural transformation. In workshops and factories, you hear the rhythmic pounding of machinery, steam engines powering new manufacturing processes, metal being moulded into intricate parts, and electric wires being strung with cautious excitement. The fire accelerated Chicago's emergence as a hub of industry and invention, as entrepreneurs and inventors seized the opportunity to build better, smarter, and faster. You meet a young engineer named Clara, who explains how the fire inspired advances in firefighting equipment, more powerful steam pumps, improved water mains, and better alarm systems. She speaks proudly of early experiments with electric lighting, which promised to make streets and buildings safer and more vibrant after dark. In a nearby university lecture hall, professors discuss urban planning innovations influenced by the fire. They speak of zoning laws designed to separate residential, commercial, and industrial districts, a concept still new, but growing in acceptance. Their voices carry a mix of urgency and hope, recognizing the need to balance growth with safety. You wander into a public park where people gather around newspapers boasting headlines about the upcoming World's Columbian Exposition, planned for 1893. The city's leaders see the event as a way to showcase Chicago's rebirth and technological prowess, turning tragedy into a celebration of progress. Amid this atmosphere of renewal, you witness how the fire reshaped not just infrastructure, but culture. Libraries, theatres, and museums open their doors, nurturing creativity and learning. Writers and artists draw inspiration from the fire's story, its destruction, resilience, and rebirth, infusing their work with new depth and meaning. Yet beneath this forward momentum, you notice a cautious awareness. The city remembers the fire's lessons and the fragility beneath the soaring towers. Innovations are embraced, but with the understanding that vigilance must accompany progress. You pause to watch the sunset cast a warm glow on the gleaming steel structures rising against the horizon. The city feels alive, not just rebuilt but transformed, its heart beating with determination and creativity. The fire's legacy is no longer just a memory of the loss, it is a living force, driving Chicago and its people toward a future defined by ingenuity, resilience, and hope. And in this evolving story, you see the enduring power of human spirit to create light from ashes and possibility from destruction. As you wander deeper into the revitalized heart of Chicago, you begin to sense how the Great Fire did more than alter the city's physical form. it reshaped its very identity. The fire, with all its devastation and destruction, became a defining moment, a collective memory that would shape how Chicagoans saw themselves and how the world viewed their city. You pass through bustling streets where new shops, theatres and cafes hum with life. The architecture is bold and modern, yet echoes of the past linger. Older brick buildings repaired or incorporated into new designs, historic plaques marking the sites where flames once raged. The city wears its scars with quiet dignity, a testament to survival and transformation. You meet a local historian, a woman named Eleanor, who speaks with a gentle passion about how the fire fostered a unique civic pride. Chicagoans learn to see themselves not just as victims of disaster, she says, but as architects of renewal. The fire became a story we tell ourselves, a story of resilience, ingenuity, and unyielding spirit. The city's newspapers reflect this evolving identity, publishing editorials and stories that celebrate the rebirth while reminding citizens of the lessons learned. Civic leaders promote a vision of Chicago as a modern, progressive metropolis, a place where anyone can rebuild and thrive. You walk by a school where children learn about the fire in history lessons, their textbooks filled with images of burning buildings alongside stories of courage and cooperation. The fire is more than history. It is part of the city's cultural fabric, a shared experience binding generations. You sense that the fire also fostered a practical realism among Chicago's residents, a recognition that growth must be balanced with care, that progress requires responsibility. This pragmatism seeps into the city's politics, architecture, and community life, shaping policies and attitudes for decades to come. Yet even as Chicago embraces its new identity, you notice a quiet reverence for the lives lost and the hardships endured. Memorials and ceremonies mark the anniversary of the fire, offering moments of reflection amid the city's forward momentum. In the evening light, you stand atop a newly built tower, gazing out at the city's sprawling grid of streets and buildings. The fire's legacy is etched into every corner, not just in brick and steel, but in the resilience and character of the people. Chicago's identity, forged in flame and rebuilt in hope, is a reminder that cities are more than their structures. They are living stories of the people who build, endure, and dream within them. And the Great Chicago Fire, with all its fury and fallout, remains one of the most powerful chapters in that story. As you step away from Chicago's streets and gaze outward, you realize that the Great Fire's impact extended far beyond the city limits. News of the disaster and the city's recovery captured the attention of the entire nation, shaping perceptions of urban life and resilience across America. The fire became a symbol, a cautionary tale, and a source of inspiration. You imagine the train tracks stretching west and east, carrying refugees, workers, and ideas to and from Chicago, connecting the city to distant towns and burgeoning metropolises. Newspapers from Boston to San Francisco ran detailed accounts, illustrations, and editorials about the blaze, its causes, and its aftermath. The fire was headline news for months. You read letters sent from Chicago to relatives across the country, stories of loss mixed with determination, pleas for aid, and proud announcements of rebuilding. These letters humanize the event, bridging the gap between local tragedy and national consciousness. Politicians and civic leaders in other cities study Chicago's response carefully. The fire sparks debates in city halls and legislative chambers about urban planning, fire safety regulations, and emergency services. Chicago becomes a case study, its experience shaping policies nationwide. You sense how the fire challenged assumptions about progress and safety. The rapid growth of American cities in the 19th century had brought prosperity but also new risks. The Great Chicago Fire exposed these dangers vividly, prompting a re-evaluation of urban development practices. You hear the cautious optimism in speeches delivered in distant capitals and city council meetings, acknowledging the potential of cities to rise from disaster, but warning of the need for foresight and regulation. Fire departments across the country invest in better equipment, training, and organisation, inspired by Chicago's hard lessons. At the same time, the fire's story resonates with the American spirit of perseverance and reinvention. It becomes part of a larger narrative about overcoming adversity and embracing innovation. Chicago's rapid recovery embodies the nation's belief in progress and the possibility of renewal, You also sense the beginning of a cultural shift. Urban centres are no longer seen just as chaotic, dangerous places, but as engines of growth, creativity, and opportunity. The fire, while devastating, helped pave the way for this evolving view. As twilight descends, you envision a map of the United States dotted with growing cities, many influenced by Chicago's experience. The fire's echo reaches far and wide, shaping the future of American urban life in subtle but profound ways. In this larger story, Chicago is both a lesson and a beacon, a city that endured catastrophe, learned from it, and inspired a nation to build smarter, safer, and stronger. Though the towering buildings and wide streets stand as monuments to Chicago's rebirth, it is the countless human stories, told and untold, that give the city its soul. As you walk quietly through neighbourhoods still marked by the fire's shadow, you begin to hear the whispered memories of those who lived through the catastrophe, their lives forever altered. You imagine Mrs. O'Leary herself, whose name became synonymous with the fire, though historians now debate the truth of the infamous cow legend. Whether or not her cow kicked over a lantern, the myth took hold, a reminder of how stories, true or not, shape our understanding of events. You sense the loneliness she must have felt, bearing the weight of blame for a disaster that was far more complex. In a modest tenement, you hear the voices of displaced families sharing tales of loss, their homes reduced to ash, their possessions gone, their futures uncertain. Yet beneath the sorrow, there is also resilience. A mother tells how neighbours gathered to share food and shelter, forming bonds that would endure long after the flames faded. You encounter workers, firefighters who battled the inferno, risking their lives amid chaos and smoke. Some were hailed as heroes, others left with scars both visible and unseen. Their stories speak of courage, exhaustion, and the bitter frustration of watching the city burn despite their efforts. Children's laughter echoes faintly through rebuilt playgrounds, a quiet testament to renewal. Many lost parents or homes, but their innocence and joy hint at the city's enduring hope. You visit a church where a memorial service is held each year on the fire's anniversary. Families come together to remember the dead and celebrate survival. The collective memory is both a wound and a balm, a way to honour the past while embracing the future. As night deepens, you reflect on how the fire's human stories, of blame and forgiveness, despair and determination, are woven into Chicago's identity. The city is more than bricks and steel. It is the sum of these lives, their struggles and triumphs. In this quiet moment, you understand that history is not just about dates and facts, but about the people who live it, their fears, hopes, and resilience. The Great Chicago Fire may have shaped a city, but it was the people who truly rebuilt it. As you linger in the quiet corners of Chicago's historical memory, you realize that the stories people tell about the Great Fire are as much a part of its legacy as the bricks and steel. Myths and legends swirl around the event, offering explanations, assigning blame, and shaping how generations understand what happened on that fateful October night in 1871. You think again of Mrs. O'Leary and her cow, the most enduring, and perhaps most misunderstood, figure in the fire's narrative. The tale of the cow kicking over a lantern, though likely fabricated or exaggerated, took hold because it provided a simple cause to a complex disaster. It gave people a tangible villain amid chaos, a focus for collective anxiety and grief. You see how this myth reflects human nature's desire to find order in disaster, to pin responsibility on someone or something rather than accept randomness and systemic failure. Yet you also sense an undercurrent of injustice, as the O'Leary family endured public scorn despite scant evidence. Beyond this, other myths flourish, that the fire was fanned by strong winds, that it spread rapidly due to wooden sidewalks and horse-drawn wagons, that the city was an inferno in a tinderbox. Each contains kernels of truth, but together they weave a narrative both vivid and simplified. You listen to historians' careful unpacking of these stories, revealing how economic interests, politics, and social prejudices influenced which versions prevailed. The fire's myth-making became part of Chicago's culture, stories passed down, reshaped, and retold around dinner tables and campfires. Yet myths also serve a purpose beyond explanation. They foster identity, caution, and connection. They remind Chicagoans of the fragility of safety and the power of resilience. They carry warnings about negligence and the importance of community vigilance. As you stand beneath a lamppost flickering softly in the evening breeze, you realise that myths, like history itself, are living things, shaped by memory, need, and time. The story of the Great Chicago Fire is as much about how people remember and interpret tragedy as about the flames themselves. In this, there is a gentle lesson, that history is never just a fixed record, but a dialogue between past and present, fact and meaning, loss and hope. The fire's myths, flawed though they may be, keep its memory alive, urging us to learn, to remember, and to rebuild. As the final hues of twilight settle over Chicago, you stand once more at the edge of the river, gazing at the city that rose from ashes with quiet determination and bold vision. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 was a moment of profound devastation, but it also marked the beginning of an extraordinary transformation, one that reshaped not just a city, but the very fabric of American urban life. You reflect on the long journey, the night when fire consumed wooden homes and businesses, the chaos and courage of those who fled or fought the flames, the stories of loss and resilience etched into every brick and street, the tireless architects and builders who forged a new skyline from steel and stone, and the enduring myths that coloured the memory of the disaster. Chicago's rebirth was more than reconstruction. It was a reinvention. The fire revealed the vulnerabilities of rapid urban growth, but also ignited innovations in architecture, firefighting, and city planning that would influence cities around the world. It sparked a spirit of resilience and innovation that remains woven into Chicago's identity. As you breathe in the cool night air, you sense the echoes of those who lived through the fire, their grief, hope, and determination still present in the city's pulse. The wide avenues, towering buildings, and bustling neighbourhoods stand as living testaments to their endurance. In the soft glow of streetlights, Chicago is a city forever changed, not only by fire, but by the unyielding will to rebuild, to improve, and to dream anew. Its story is a reminder that even in the face of great destruction, there is the possibility of renewal, growth, and hope. And so, as night deepens, you carry with you the quiet knowledge that history is not only a record of what has been lost, but also a guide to what can be rebuilt, stronger, wiser, and more enduring than before. Thank you for travelling back with me through the story of the Great Chicago Fire, its flames, its heartbreak, and its incredible rebirth. As you settle into comfort now, may the calm of history's lessons wrap around you like a gentle breeze, soothing your mind and easing you into peaceful rest. Let the resilience of those who rebuilt inspire quiet strength within you as you drift slowly into sleep, carrying the warmth of hope and renewal into your dreams. Good night.